Chapter 2059. In just a moment, Fan Qiuhe had completely turned into a living monster, completely stripped of his human appearance. Emolienne stared at the freak in front of her with incomparably cold eyes, and she said word by word, "You look too disgusting. Kill him." At Emolienne's command, the little Tai Sui snapped its fingers, and a huge stone palm materialized, slapping down on Fan Qiuhe's head. Bang! All of Fan Qiuhe's tentacles were crushed into meat paste. His entire body sank into great pain and he wailed miserably. Fan Gu's entire body went limp on the ground. She didn't expect these young people's strength to be so terrifying. Even if she gave Fan Qiuhe the final strong drug, she still couldn't escape from this dungeon. "Don't kill me, don't kill me. Your Highness. It has nothing to do with me. We were entrusted by others to be used by others. Crown Princess. Crown Princess." Arbor didn't want to listen to her anymore and he turned to leave this gloomy hell. Emolienne naturally wouldn't stop him. She couldn't wait for Jojo to leave this filthy place as soon as possible, far far away from here. "Crown Princess. Let me go. Crown Princess." Fan Gu burst into tears. She crawled and rolled a few steps on the ground, but the Peony Fairy kicked her back to the metal bed. "Oh, don't make so much noise. You're making this fairy's ears hurt." Emolienne coldly swept a glance at Fan Gu. After a moment of silence she said indifferently, "Don't worry. I guarantee that you'll live well for the rest of your lives." She casually threw out the bronze cauldron, and a gust of wind rolled over Fan Gu's head. Fan Gu's entire body quivered, and then she let out an extremely tragic scream. A cluster of black flames burned Fan Gu and Fan Qiuhe's bodies. Emolienne's cold voice sounded faintly without any warmth. "Underworld Yellow Springs, remember to find your enemies. China's Emolienne will wait for your revenge at any time." It's a pity. A soulless person couldn't even go down to the 19 levels of hell, let alone reincarnate and seek revenge. A moment later, 2 wisps of soul fire fell into Emolienne's hands. Little Tai Sui and the others couldn't help but shudder internally upon hearing this. This savage fellow had actually refined the souls of 2 soul masters. Was he planning to become a puppet? Compared to when he had refined Lu Yiji's soul back then, Prince Emo was obviously much more adept this time. After coming up from the dungeon, Emolienne found his little wife by a secluded cliff in the Qingtian Valley. At this time it was already the beginning of the 12th month and winter was about to arrive. The grass and trees were withered, and as far as the eye could see, everything had a withered appearance. His Jojo was standing in the midst of the withered leaves with his back to him. He stood on the edge of the cliff, his white clothes fluttering in the wind. No one knew what he was thinking, but he raised his left hand slightly, his gaze fixed on his palm. Emolienne walked over with light steps. When he was several steps away from her, he silently stopped. Naturally, Qiaomu had already heard the footsteps he purposefully let out. She retracted her gaze and looked up at the withered scene in the distance. Her voice was soft as she said, "Do you know, I've been working hard to not let myself become a person I loathe? I don't want to become a devil and become as shameless as them. But just now, I used Fan Gu's daughter to threaten her. I had Fan Gu cut open her own nephew's stomach and stain her hands with blood." Chapter 2060. Emolienne quietly stood behind her. His heart clenched tightly as he listened to her almost desolate voice. It was as if, at this very moment, her small hand was tightly gripping his heart, clutching it so tightly that his entire heart started to ache fiercely. "Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror. I feel very unfamiliar, very lost. I don't want to be a person that I despise. But many times I simply can't control my own emotions. I only want to be unbridled and willful just this once, just this once. I don't want to be a human. I want to become a demon. I looked at my hand just now, it's white and clean without any blemishes. But I know it's not clean at all. It's so dirty there's no way to go back. When Arbor turned around she saw Emolienne's figure flashing and suddenly landing in front of her. Stretching out his arm he hugged her tightly into his embrace. Smelling his scent, Qiaomu quietly leaned into his embrace. For a moment she only felt her eyes sting, and she had the urge to willfully burst into tears. She wanted to wantonly act coquettishly and roll around in this person's warm embrace. She knew that no matter how overboard she was, he would always stand by her side and support her unconditionally. However, she didn't want him to bear the sin that originally belonged to her. That way, Jojo's heart would ache, he would be sad, he would loathe her and despise her. Emolien's hand gently caressed the back of her head as he hugged her tightly in his embrace. He looked down at her and murmured softly, "I will only say what I'm going to say today, just this once. You must firmly remember it in your heart and engrave it in the depths of your soul. For thousands of years you must not forget it." His slender fingers gently brushed the black hair on her temples as he gazed deeply into her eyes with gentleness. "I don't care if you're a human or a demon. 9 heavens, 9 underworlds, blue skies and clouds, blue skies and yellow springs, I'll follow you. You and I will hold hands for all eternity." Arbor stared at him blankly. Inexplicably, she couldn't stop her tears as they kept falling from her big eyes. She was crying. Emolien's heart clenched tightly. If Fangu and Fanchioha were still alive, he would like to cut them into pieces a few more times before making a decision. "Did you hear that, my Jojo?" Emolien raised her hand to wipe away her tears. She pretended to be calm and gave her a faint smile. In fact, her heart was in a mess and she couldn't relax. He stretched out his arms and pulled her into his wide embrace. "Jojo, you have me. Don't think too much. Just do it. Do what you think is right. No matter what the outcome is, I will help you deal with it. If you want to be willful, then be willful. Do whatever you want to do. My Jojo deserves all the best treatment." He reached out and held her small hand, completely enveloping it in his palm. He murmured softly, "How can such a clean hand be dirty? It's not dirty at all. In this world, my Jojo is the most beautiful." He lifted her up and gently covered her lips. "Don't you think so?" Arbor's heart was so close to him that she could only feel her little heart beating loudly as if it was going to jump out of her chest. Arbor pursed her lips and nodded repeatedly. 9 heavens, 9 underworlds, blue skies and clouds, blue skies and yellow springs, I'll follow you too. Chapter 2061. Emolien, to be able to meet you in this lifetime. It's probably the luckiest thing that happened to me in this lifetime. At that time I was probably still struggling bitterly in a painful hell. I have you. I have you. I have you. Miss Chiao moved her small head and snuggled into his embrace, squirming back and forth. It was as if she could see herself lying in a dark dungeon during those difficult years, staring at the dark ceiling in a deep daze and helplessness. It was as if she could hear Fangu's shrill voice laughing harshly in her ear. I'm going back to Willow Lane tomorrow. I've been looking at a few families for your cousin recently. There seems to be one that's not bad." Fanchioha's hearty laughter rang out. "Then congratulations, Auntie. You should be able to hold your grandson next year. Get married?" At that time she could only stare blankly at the dark ceiling of the dungeon, listening to the squeaking of the rats. She asked herself again and again in the depths of her heart, what is it like to get married? What is the experience of life? I'm so envious of those people whose limbs are intact and who can walk normally under the sun. I'm so envious of Fangu's daughter, so envious, so envious. Emolien raised a hand to stroke her small head. Her gaze passed over Jojo's black hair and landed on Tong, who was standing in the distance. A cold and stern gaze was released with icy determination. Once the order was given, the latter immediately knelt on one knee and swiftly left with his men to carry out the order. When cutting weeds, you must dig up the roots. Fangu's daughter kill. When it came to the degree of hardening one's heart, His Highness the Crown Prince was clearly many times stronger than Jojo. This man who controlled the lives and deaths of many people on Seekong Planet didn't have much gentleness and kindness. No matter how harmonious he looked on the outside, his heart was extremely cold. But for the sake of Mo's future, for the sake of Mo Kingdom's stability and well-being, he could even ruthlessly cut off his 8-year-old nephew Mo Cheng. If it wasn't for Jojo's sake, if it wasn't for Shu Quan's intelligence, Mo Cheng would already be a dead man now. He was different from Jojo. If one were to break Jojo's cold outer shell, there would be a soft-hearted little fellow nestled in her snail shell, desperately unwilling to come out. He was a man who was as ruthless as a knife through and through. Not to mention killing an insignificant Fangu's daughter. For his Jojo he would kill 100, kill 1,000 and turn into a demon. So what? Arbor looked up at Emolien and wrinkled his nose. I'm hungry. A faint smile immediately appeared on Emolien's lips. She reached out and carried the little fellow horizontally. What do you want to eat? I'll cook it for you. How about snake meat? Hiss. Snakebao was furious. The little white snake raised its small head and rubbed its little master's wrist. Master Silver, dragon meat is delicious, dragon meat is delicious. Arbor reached out and flicked the little white snake's head. He looked back at Emolien, his large, watery eyes sparkling brightly. Emolien lowered her head and kissed his smooth forehead. Then why don't we find an inn to stay at first? I'll cook a sumptuous meal for you. Okay. Arbor nodded. With a wave of his sleeve, dozens of explosive birds flew out from Paradise Planet. These little fellows who played suicide all day only had 3 years of lifespan, and they were preparing for suicide every day. Go. Arbor flicked his finger, and the flock of explosive birds scattered around Qingtian Valley on Mount Wuang. Chapter 2062. Boom. Boom boom. A few explosions rang out. Wherever the explosive birds passed, the serene and beautiful clear sky valley was blasted into ruins. Arbor swept an indifferent glance over, her eyes without the slightest ripple of emotion. This kind of place that hides filth and tolerates filth, so be it. No matter how beautiful its scenery looked, it couldn't hide its rotten nature. The entire clear sky gate was engulfed in flames. The light of the fire contrasted with Arbor's calm face. She looked at the building that was crackling in the flames with a trace of coldness in her eyes. The past passed like a dream, and yesterday's events were like yesterday's death. From now on, there was no longer that smiling big brother in the world. She hoped that he could live comfortably and happily in that bloody hell. Have a safe journey. Arbor tugged at the corners of her mouth, trying hard to reveal a smile. Under the light of the fire, it looked extremely magnificent. Emolien's palm covered her small face. My Jojo, I hope that from now on you will no longer have any inner demons or nightmares. You will be healthy, happy and smooth. On Shuntian Prefecture's Ping En Street, many shops had closed down due to poor management due to the changes in the world. However, many small stalls had popped up on the streets and alleys, selling all kinds of strange little things. This street could be said to be the busiest in the entire Shuntian Prefecture. Immortal Grass Tea House. Hey, did you guys hear? Yesterday, a valley in Mount Wuang 50 kilometers outside the city, strangely caught fire. Everyone said that someone had angered a fire-breathing divine beast on Mount Wuang. The divine beast showed its might. Yes. I heard that the prefecture lord issued a mission and sent several teams to Mount Wuang to investigate. Say, this matter is going to blow up. Hey, do you guys think it could be a fire-breathing divine beast? Who knows? Whether or not a divine beast is a divine beast has little to do with us ordinary people. That's true. I heard that something big happened in Willow Alley yesterday. Yes. It seems that there was a female corpse hanging at the entrance of Willow Alley. It almost scared the night watchmen out of their wits. Did you find out who killed him? Sai, you're really naive. What kind of world is this? Who knows if a corpse puppet will jump out and bite you to death when you walk down the street? That's right. In the past, when there was peace and prosperity, even if 1 or 2 civilians died, they wouldn't necessarily investigate. I heard that the 4th steward of the manor head gave the order to burn that woman to prevent her corpse from mutating. Poor thing, he's still young. It's said that his family is quite wealthy. I wonder if it's a robbery. Robbery? One of them snorted and said, "You guys are really naive." It said that the female corpse's mouth was covered with mud, and there were 3 soul-subduing talismans on her body. Even if she went to the underworld, she wouldn't be able to ask for help. How heartless. Killing someone is just a matter of time. GGG. Cha-cha. The bell at the door rang and everyone subconsciously turned their heads to look. With this glance, his eyes almost blurred. The 2 women who entered the door were as beautiful as peaches and plums and as brilliant as flowing flowers. Their ornaments jingled, revealing half of their fair and delicate arms. Their soft breasts rose and fell and their slender waists were half exposed. The onlookers' eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. The sound of saliva being sucked in could be heard incessantly. The gazes of all the men in the hall fell on the 2 of them. Chapter 2063. Aya, This is the capital of Shuntian Prefecture, but I haven't seen any spacious and bright taverns along the way. I'm so tired. Fairy Ginkgo flicked the pink silk handkerchief in her hand and waved it in the air. I'm not going. Have a cup of tea before you go. The men and women who followed them in were all like immortals in a painting, making people unable to take their eyes off them. The man in red brushed his sleeves, moving gracefully. The man in black had picturesque features, gentle as the wind. The little girl held by the man in black had an expressionless face, cold as ice. Her eyes were like the stars in the dark night, dreamy and illusory, as if she could suck in a person's soul with just a glance. This group of people walked in slowly, immediately illuminating the entire humble room. Everyone felt that the small shabby tea house in front of them had improved a lot in an instant. The waiter hurriedly ran over, wiped the chairs and stools, and invited them to sit down with a smile. Arbor sat by the window, one hand supporting her chin, her gaze drifting to the bustling street. And do you think that child will have a good life in the future? Of course. Although that farmer isn't particularly rich, the couple are hard-working people, praised as good people by the surrounding villages. Emolien raised his hand and patted her head. Don't worry, that child will get better. Arbor turned her little head, looked at him and nodded. There were no survivors in the dungeon of Clear Sky Valley, but the child they had saved in the underground base had stubbornly survived. After a period of recuperation, her body had improved a lot. When she was sent to the farmer, the child was already able to speak. As long as she took the pills she left behind on time, she would be able to jump around in less than half a year. She hoped that the child would have a normal family and walk a normal life path, and that there would be no more disasters or mishaps in the future. Good girl, I'll send people to check on that child from time to time. There will be no problem. Okay. Arbor nodded, taking the tea he handed over. Dang dang. The bell at the door rang again. Arbor looked up and saw an old acquaintance, the little yellow crane and her unruly senior sister, Fairy Lingfei, walking in. Lingfei's gaze fell on Arbor and the others with a trace of resentment in his eyes. Immortal Yellow Crane had already strode over and greeted Xiao Mu enthusiastically. Little benefactor, you're also here. Huang He. Fairy Lingfei yelled at her in exasperation. She turned and walked towards the door. Let's go back to the residence. Yellow Crane Fairy turned her head and glanced at her senior sister. She held Arbor's hand and said, Little benefactor, where do you plan to stay? I have to return to the residence to see Master. Tell me where you're staying and I'll come and play with you tomorrow. Huang He. Fairy Lingfei roared, causing Fairy Huang He's hand, which was holding Arbor, to tremble slightly. Heavens, senior sister Lingfei's temper has been too bad recently. For it to suddenly flare up, could it be that his body had mutated? Why aren't you leaving? Fairy Lingfei swept a cold glance at Yellow Crane Fairy, and her gaze swept disdainfully over Arbor. Today the residence is hosting a banquet to entertain the young masters from the Divine Continent. Master wants us to return as soon as possible. Are you going to defy Master's orders? Sob sob sob. Yellow Crane Fairy bit her handkerchief and reluctantly let go of Arbor's hand. Little benefactor, then tomorrow at this time, can you wait for me here? Fairy Yellow Crane, can you not act cute? Chapter 2064. Arbor imperceptibly pulled over He-Shurchen's sleeve and wiped her little paws. Exasperated, He-Shurchen tugged back. Thank you, this isn't a rag. Benefactor, if I can't repay your kindness, I won't be at ease for the rest of my life. Fairy Huang He bit her handkerchief, tears about to fall out. Huang He. Fairy Lingfei was probably about to explode from this brainless stoic fangirl. She took a few steps forward and kicked Fairy Huang He's butt. Bam. Plang. The soup, it's all spilled. Let's go. This idiot was simply disgracing the palace of cold blood in Shuntian Prefecture. Fairy Lingfei grabbed Huang He's arm and strode outside. Don't think you can approach our palace of cold blood just because you've hooked up with Huang He. Are you deluding yourself into thinking you can achieve meteoric success in a single step? Give up on that idea. Fairy Lingfei turned around and shouted at Arbor as she walked out the door. The little stoic looked at her in bewilderment. Why did she feel like this senior sister of Huang He seemed to have contracted a deranged disease? Do you want me to take your pulse? The little stoic extended a small hand, but before she could finish speaking, Fairy Ling Fei rolled her eyes at her. Deranged disease can be treated in the early stages. You only need to recuperate for half a month before you fully recover. In the later stages, you only need to pay more attention to controlling your emotions, paying attention to your dietary restrictions, and engaging in sexual intercourse less. HM? The little fellow looked in bewilderment at Prince Imo, who had suddenly reached out to cover her mouth. She turned around and saw that everyone in the hall seemed to have very odd expressions. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal even covered his forehead with his hand, exasperated. What did she say? Why did Fairy Ling Fei's face and ears turn red and her nose puffed? She clearly looked like she was about to explode from anger. She was merely explaining medical theory and reminding Ling Fei that treatment should be done sooner rather than later. It couldn't be delayed. Was there a problem? Shouldn't an illness be treated as soon as possible? What if the illness spread in the later stages and there was nothing they could do? PFT. Fairy Ginkgo couldn't hold it in any longer. She collapsed on the table and pounded her fist on the table, indicating that she really couldn't hold it in any longer. He felt like this Fairy Ling Fei and the little stoic were talking in two completely different worlds. What a joke. Can you not be so funny? Fairy Ginkgo wiped the tears from her eyes as she laughed. She felt as if she had laughed so hard that her abs were showing. What's so funny? Do you think you're not sick? The stoic-faced man pointed at the middle-aged man who was grinning from ear to ear at the table next to him. I see that your eye sockets are sunken and your complexion is dark and gloomy. That's because you lack essence and are unable to maintain a healthy complexion. Overdoing it every day will deplete the essence of your kidney. If this goes on in less than half a year, you will not have enough yang blood and will die of kidney deficiency. Mo Lien Yuan Shurchen Little Tai Sui and the others all grimaced. Ginkgo Fairy pounded the table and laughed wildly. In the quiet lobby, it seemed particularly bold and unrestrained. The tea house, which had been silent for a moment, suddenly burst into laughter. The middle-aged man's donkey face fell. He stood up and pointed at Arbor in exasperation. You little girl. What are you saying? Don't you know shame? Doctors don't differentiate between men and women when it comes to judging people. How can I not know shame? Arbor impatiently swept a glance over the people in the lobby who were laughing uncontrollably. Was there something wrong with these people? What kind of joke did she say? She was properly pointing out someone's illness, yet she was ridiculed by the crowd. Chapter 2065. You have pimples on both sides of your cheeks that sometimes itch. Your complexion is sallow and you vomit every 3 days. It's indeed a stomach ailment. You still have time to laugh at others, but your own body also has stagnant vital energy and blood stasis. You won't last 3 years. The little stoic swept a glance at the young man who was grinning from ear to ear. You're young, but your waist is stooped and it's hard to stand upright. Your sweat pores open and close abnormally and cold evil invades your body. You clearly have an abscess. Fancy that you can still laugh. If the cold air penetrates your blood vessels, it will evolve into a fistula. And you're even more ridiculous. Your face is green and your eyes are red. When you laugh, your throat growls. You've lost vital energy in your stomach. This is a sign of death. Absolute silence ensued after her tirade. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at this young little stoic who mercilessly reprimanded others the moment she opened her mouth. Most importantly, she didn't even bother to lift her eyelids after saying so much. Her gaze swept past them with a snort of contempt, as if she was sweeping a group of ants and didn't linger for a moment. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal clenched his fist and couldn't resist bursting into laughter. No way, he couldn't take it anymore. His JoJo was seriously too adorable. Even when she kept a straight face and reprimanded others, she was much more adorable than others. How preposterous. The middle-aged man with the long donkey face was the first to jump up. With a huff, he flung his sleeves and strode out of the tea house. Soon after, a string of people also stood up with him, their faces ashen from anger, and they all left the tea house with quick strides. He only came to drink tea, yet everyone in the tea house knew that he had a kidney deficiency, a stomach ailment, and an irregular lung meridian. Where would these wealthy business owners put their faces? The tea house owner kept pleading like a grandpa. Don't go. Hey everyone, don't go. Boss Zhang. Everyone threw down their money and left in a huff. At this time, an idiot suddenly clapped vigorously with a fangirl-like adoration on her face. Her grape-like eyes stared intently at Jojo and said, "Little benefactor, you're so awesome. You know so much." "Get lost." Fairy Ling Fei roared angrily. She grabbed Jojo's die-hard fan Fairy Yellow Crane and dragged her outside. "Little benefactor, I'll come and find you tomorrow. Wait for me." Hey, senior sister, don't pull me." Senior sister. Insanity, if not treated properly, will worsen in the future. It will lead to emotional rage, mental disorder, and even severely affect the couple's daily life, resulting in the inability to give birth. Before Miss Chiao could finish her words, Prince Imo, who couldn't bear to listen any longer, pulled her into his arms and covered her mouth forcefully. Fairy Ling Fei was so angry that her entire body trembled violently. She abruptly turned her head and bellowed at the little stoic sitting inside the tea house. "I'm not sick." Arbor pulled Emolienne's hand away and looked at the man in confusion. "Why are you gagging me? People like you who refuse treatment are the most fearful. If you don't treat a minor illness, you'll be unlucky if you get a major one. You're always so stubborn." Hu Shurchen's shoulders trembled as he lowered his head. He laughed so hard that his stomach hurt. Emolienne didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "A stubborn duck, isn't that your style, darling?" "Humph." Miss Chiao retracted her small hand and picked up the teacup to gulp down a large mouthful of tea. It was so tiring. If it weren't for the fact that those people were truly outrageous, how could she have been happy and said so much to analyze their illnesses? However, this bunch of idiots all thought she was a barefoot doctor on the streets and spoke without thinking. Chapter 2066. You have no taste. I can't be bothered with you. It was simply a waste of her saliva. Arbor drank another mouthful of tea. Just as the group was about to leave, they suddenly saw a middle-aged scholarly man walk into the tea house's entrance. As soon as he entered, he cupped his hands at everyone and said with a smile, "Are you the top-notch academy teachers and students who won 3rd place in the academy ranking competition? Prefecture Lord invites you. Please honor us with your presence." Emolienne and company looked at this middle-aged man with a spurious smile. "Uncle De, why are you inviting them?" Fairy Ling Fei was so angry that she wanted to vomit blood, but she had no choice but to walk back into the tea house when she heard his voice. Ever since she met the little Stoics group, she, Fairy Ling Fei, had been making a fool of herself. Her various humiliations made her feel indignant. Yet now Master and Prefecture Lord were actually inviting this bunch of bumpkins to Shuntian Prefecture's main estate for a banquet? On what basis? Fairy Ling Fei's entire face hung upside down in anger, and she coldly glared at Arbor and company. That stoic face was certainly hateful, but those men beside the little stoic were probably all blind. Such a beautiful woman like her actually couldn't enter their eyes at first glance? Was Gung Pengcheng impatient? As soon as they stepped into Shuntian Prefecture's prefectural city, Gung Pengcheng impatiently wanted to invite them over. When Arbor thought about how she had secretly crossed swords with Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord many times, she couldn't help but feel vexed. She was well aware of Shuntian Prefecture's intentions. "Jojo, if you don't want to go, then don't deal with them," Emolienne said softly as she grasped the little fellow's small hand. Could it be that a mere Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord could overturn the heavens? Arbor shook her head. "Let's go take a look." When she thought of the various good deeds Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord had done, Arbor couldn't help but sneer. Previously, Prince Imo told her that they didn't find anything substantial or useful during the process of searching Fan Gu and Fan Chioha's souls. Someone must have tampered with them. However, it didn't matter if they couldn't find anything. This was because Arbor was very clear that this matter was definitely related to the Shuntian Mansion's mansion master, Gung Pengcheng. Seeing that Arbor had agreed, the middle-aged scholar who came to invite them seemed to be relieved. He smiled and cupped his hands. "That's good. Everyone please. Today several young heroes from the Divine Land were invited to the main mansion. All of you are of similar age, why don't we make friends?" From the middle-aged scholar's point of view, being able to make friends with the young masters and young ladies of the Divine Land was naturally something that everyone envied. Unfortunately, Arbor's expression was cold. He glanced at him, got up and walked out of the door with Emolienne hand in hand. "Such a shabby carriage, is it here to pick us up?" Arbor said in disdain. He glanced coldly at the middle-aged scholar and said, "Since your mansion's mansion master isn't sincerely inviting you, then please leave." Oh wait. He saw that the little stoic was about to turn around and leave while holding onto the man's arm. The middle-aged scholar couldn't help but feel anxious. This little fellow didn't follow the rules at all. She had previously agreed to follow him to the city lord's estate, so why did her attitude completely change in such a short time after they walked from inside to outside? "The city lord is sincerely inviting you. What was wrong with this carriage? How was it neglecting them?" The middle-aged scholar simply wanted to howl in his heart. Women's minds were truly fickle. Arbor's eyes didn't have the slightest warmth. He swept the middle-aged scholar a glance and snorted. Break. Chapter 2067. This kind of lousy carriage was so bumpy that it might even make you throw up last night's dinner. Even the carriage she had left Kwoto village in back then couldn't compare. Fairy Lingfei stood behind Uncle Da and said resentfully, "We're only going to Shantian Prefecture's main residence for less than a quarter of an hour, but you're making so many rude requests." Qiao Mu harumphed and turned her small head away, no longer paying attention to Fairy Lingfei. Emolien held Arbor's hand. Just as they were about to leave, they heard the middle-aged scholar call out anxiously, "Wait everyone, please wait. I'll have someone prepare a new horse and carriage. Miss, you'll definitely be satisfied." This scholar was truly helpless. These people were clearly centered around this stoic young miss. If this young miss left, not a single one of them would be left behind. Emolien's cold gaze swept over the middle-aged scholar's face and she sneered, "Gung Pengcheng is so considerate." Arbor knew very well what Gung Pengcheng was up to and Emolien even more so. However, the two of them weren't afraid of getting into trouble. If Gung Pengcheng wanted to cause trouble, then he would have to weigh his own worth and see if he had the qualifications to cause trouble. Soon, a low-key and luxurious carriage with dark gold ripples appeared before everyone's eyes. There was more than enough space to accommodate 20 to 30 people. Thus, everyone filed in and sat in the same carriage. Upon seeing this, the little yellow crane also hurriedly squeezed in. It had originally wanted to squeeze in next to Qiao Qiao, but after being glared at by Crown Prince Mo's icy gaze, it immediately shrunk to the side listlessly, not daring to fight over the spot next to Qiao Qiao with that great sir. Fairy Lingfei, who was used to Fairy Yellow Crane's brainless fangirl, wasn't so angry now. However, she was just about to get into the carriage with a stifled feeling in her chest when Dao Wuji, who was sitting at the door, blocked her. "Hey, the carriage is full. Don't come in again." Fairy Lingfei was instantly enraged. Seeing that they were about to quarrel again, the middle-aged scholar hurriedly turned around and brought over a vigorous horse for Fairy Lingfei. Fairy Lingfei angrily leaped onto her horse and swung her whip. Everyone could only see the horse galloping away, kicking up large clouds of dust as if venting her anger. Sure enough, from the tea house to the Shantian Prefecture's main residence, it took about 7 to 8 minutes. Everyone got off the carriage one by one and followed Uncle Da, who was respectfully leading the way in front, into the main mansion. They passed through the corridor and walked towards the main hall. Layers upon layers of houses were hidden between the mountains, rivers, and pavilions. Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord was holding a banquet for guests. Accompanying him was his wife, the current palace lord of the Palace of Heartless, Madame Feng. Pa. Arbor's group didn't expect such a wonderful show to be waiting for them as soon as they arrived in front of the reception hall. There was a row of 7 or 8 people tied up in front of the door. All of them were badly mutilated. It was hard for those young masters and ladies who were laughing and joking in the hall to still be able to eat. The Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord was too impatient to give them a show of strength. Prince Mo's lower lip curled slightly. Holding his little wife's hand, he led everyone into the main hall slowly. Arbor turned his head to take a look and suddenly stopped in his tracks. A trace of anger flashed across his face, and without any explanation he slapped a burly man with his palm. This person was currently using his whip on a thin and weak servant. The whip was swung with all his might and vigor. "It's the last day of the month. I'm here to rob a monthly ticket. Don't forget to vote when you pass by. Vote, vote, vote." Chapter 2068. Suddenly, the wind from someone's palm swept across his back, and the burly man couldn't help but stumble forward. He didn't have eyes and bumped into another person's whip. Immediately, his flesh was lacerated, and he howled miserably as he covered the whip marks on his face. For a moment, there was silence both inside and outside the hall. Because of this sudden scene, everyone stopped their random banter and looked over in surprise. Sitting in the main hall, the Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord and his wife respectfully accompanied them. They looked at Arbor's group with different expressions. The Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord, Gung Pengcheng, looked like a middle-aged man close to 50 years old. His temples were slightly bald and he had thick eyebrows and big eyes. When he looked at Arbor, that kind of scrutinizing gaze was full of deterrence. Sitting beside him was the palace lord of the Palace of Cold Blood, Madame Feng. There were fishtail marks at the corners of her eyes, and there were several fine wrinkles on her neck. Although her makeup was very delicate, it couldn't completely cover the traces of age on her face. Instead, her pair of dark eyes appeared very delicate and bright. Arbor looked expressionlessly at the burly man who fell to the ground and covered his face as he cried out in pain. His fingers moved slightly and a green vine drilled out from his wrist. With a swoosh, it cut the wooden stake in front of him. The vine swung and a skinny figure was caught in the air. In the next instant he pulled the dark and skinny 11-year-old boy to his side. Not only did this child have several whip marks on his face, but his body was also full of wounds. His legs were also twisted in an abnormal way, as if they had been broken while he was still alive. Xiao Mu's cold and severe gaze abruptly landed on the burly man who hit her. Scum! Countless vines drilled out from the bottom of the burly man's feet, and like thousands of poisonous snakes, they drilled into the man's body. Ah! Caught off guard, the burly man took a full blow from a level 4 spiritual master. How could he withstand it? He cried out involuntarily on the spot. Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord, Gung Pengcheng, stood up and stretched out his hand. You must be a student from a top academy. If you have anything to say, please speak properly. Who am I? Don't you know? Mannerhead, why are you still pretending? Arbor coldly interrupted Gung Pengcheng's hypocritical words. There was not the slightest fluctuation of emotion on his stoic face. The little girl's eyes were filled with disdain and mockery, making people feel uncomfortable. However, Gung Pengcheng forced himself to endure it and said with a fake chuckle, Miss seems to have some misunderstanding about this Mannerhead. Crack. The burly man who was originally hanging on the brambles suddenly fell from above and landed heavily on the ground, interrupting Gung Pengcheng's words. The hall was dead silent. Manor Lord Gung's eyelids twitched and he felt a little angry. This little girl was too bold. As expected, it was completely consistent with the news that his subordinate had sent him a few days ago. What an arrogant, despotic and spoiled brat. Originally he wanted to give them a small show of strength, but who would have thought that before he could do so his subordinate would be killed on the spot. Damn it! Gung Pengcheng's face instantly darkened, and he looked at Arbor with a slightly angry expression. What are you doing? Arbor was too lazy to pay attention to him. She placed the thin, dark-skinned child on the ground and reached out to treat the injury on his broken leg. Hee. At this moment, a well-dressed young man walked down from above Gung Pengcheng. His appearance was delicate and handsome, but his chin was very sharp and thin and his skin was too white. He seemed to be sick all year round. Chapter 2069. He was dressed in a long white robe that appeared somewhat transparent under the sunlight. One could vaguely see a lake blue high-collared inner robe inside, and a few lotus flowers were embroidered on the side of his neck with golden thread. Although his clothes were very luxurious, this young master's eyes looked very listless, as if he would faint in the next second. Emolienne raised her eyebrows. Although this was the first time she saw this person, his appearance matched with a person in the book of relatives and friends in the divine land in her mind. Prince Jianpei's heir Mo Kuan. Prince Jianpei was Imperial Father's youngest brother and lived in the divine land's capital all year round. Speaking of which, this crown prince of Jianpei was his younger cousin. For some reason he actually came to Shantian Prefecture personally. However, his luxurious accessories could not hide his sickly face that was full of indulgence. The vassal prince of Jianpei Mo Kuan walked down the steps step by step. When he arrived in front of Qiao Mu and Emolienne, he sized Qiao Mu up from head to toe. Your looks are not bad, but it's a pity that your temperament is unflattering. Forget it, this young master will be merciful and take you in. I'll bring you back and let someone educate you well. Emolian! Exclamation point. Hu Shurchen, did. Little Tai Sui Dao Wuji, and the others all looked at Prince Jianping's heir as if they were looking at an idiot. Was this person tired of living? Couldn't he live properly? Why did he have to provoke Prince Emo? Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord hurriedly stood up and smiled obsequiously, introducing him to Arbor and Emolian. This is the nephew of the Divine Land's emperor, Prince Jianping's heir, Emo Kuan. Little Tai Sui. Hu Shurchen, did. They both looked at Prince Jianping's heir sympathetically. At such a young age, his life was about to come to an end. What a pitiful and sad thing this was. Unfortunately, they could not help even if they wanted to. They could only sit and watch the show and eat melons to relieve their boredom. Arbor finished treating the boy's leg injury and gave him a pill before patting his head and saying, "It's fine now." "Thank you, miss." At this moment, Meng Mai also recognized who the young lady in front of her was. She was the girl who had led him to look for the land whale at the small market at the entrance of Shuntian Prefecture that day. Little Meng Mai bowed his head gratefully at Arbor, repeatedly thanking her for saving his life. If it wasn't for this honorable young lady saving him once again, he probably wouldn't have been able to endure that vicious beating just now. Emo Kun stood in front of them. His face had changed from its initial complacency to an extremely ugly expression. "Brat, didn't you hear what I said?" The Crown Prince of Jianping, Emo Kun, glared angrily at Arbor and threatened, "Do you know who I am? How dare you neglect me like this?" Emo Kun, Crown Prince of Jianping, was furious. Flap. Suddenly, a bone-chilling hand grabbed Emo Kun's neck. Emolian stared at him coldly for a long while before she laughed coldly. "You're the Crown Prince of Jianping, Emo Kun, right?" Little Tai Sui, Hu Jinshan and the others were all secretly getting excited. Coming. Prince Emo was going to teach this brat an unforgettable lesson. What do you want to do?" How could the Crown Prince of Jianping dare to say any more nonsense when he suddenly realized that his neck had fallen into someone else's hands? His face flushed red as he shouted anxiously and angrily, "Let go, let go." He was the nephew of the Divine Prefecture's emperor, the son of the Crown Prince of Jianping. How could he be in such a sorry state and have his neck pinched by a nobody? Chapter 2070. Emolian's gaze was extremely cold. There was no warmth in her eyes as she looked at the heir of the Duke of Jianping, whom she was holding by the neck like a little chick. "What do you want?" The heir of the Duke of Jianping, Emo Kun, was not a fool. After all, he had been in power for so many years, so he could still discern some dangers. For example, this man before him had a huge impact on his soul, causing him to feel a trace of inexplicable fear. Why didn't he know? It was as if this man was not someone he, Emo Kun, could provoke. But was that possible? He came from the capital of Shenzhou. How could a mere cultivator from the 6 prefectures possibly? But Emo Kun's gaze changed several times, each time uglier than the last. At this moment he had already experienced what it meant to be a fish on the chopping block. If his slender neck fell into the hands of an unrelated person, it would indeed be quite depressing. Moreover, this person's strength seemed to be increasing continuously. In his hands he was like a fish that had been peeled out of the water. His limbs twitched uncontrollably and his face was paler than before. No, don't kill me. Emo Kun finally panicked. He simply could not understand why this was happening. He could not even last half a move in the hands of a mere cultivator from the middle 6 prefectures, and his neck was already being held? This did not seem real no matter how one looked at it. Arbor was completely focused on treating little fierce Mike earlier, so she did not hear Emo Kun's teasing at all. Seeing how Emolian treated the young man before her, she could not help but feel slightly moved. She whispered to Shichen, "Is that heir of the Duke of Jianping Emo Kun Lian's relative?" Shichen nodded. "It's obvious. This Emo Kun is her younger cousin." He was so ruthless to his younger cousin. Arbor looked at Emo Kun sympathetically and pursed her lips. He must have angered my Lian. He really brought this upon himself. At this moment, Manor Head Geng and the palace master of the Palace of Cold Blood, Madame Feng, could not help but cry out, "Little brother, please stop. Stop, quickly stop." Geng Pengcheng practically jumped up and stamped his feet as he shouted, "Don't mess around. This young master in front of you is not a young man that ordinary people can casually touch. He's... Boom. Before Gung Pengcheng could finish his sentence, he saw the poor guy in Emo Lien's hand get kicked down the stairs by Emo Lien like a flying quail. Emo Kun took a few steps toward the stairs. Before he could even slow down, his entire body fell flat on the ground and fiercely bit the ground. Fortunately, the two big teeth in front of the door were saved. Otherwise, his current appearance would be even worse. He would be so ugly that he couldn't even look at it. Shocked, Manor Lord Gung hastily stood up and signaled the maidservants around him to swarm forward and help Emo Kun up. Your Highness! Your Highness! Everyone scrambled to help the Crown Prince of Giantpain up from the ground. They didn't dare to raise their heads, let alone look at his slightly distorted face. You all of you! Prince Giantpain was so angry that a lump of blood formed in his chest. He opened his mouth and was about to rush out. With great difficulty, the Crown Prince finally managed to stop his throat from choking. He rubbed his chest with all his might, and only then did he feel slightly better. Your Highness, Your Highness! Go away! The Crown Prince of Giantpain roared. He forcefully pushed aside the two maidservants beside him and strode toward Emo Lien. Chapter 2071. I wasn't careful just now. This time I won't go easy on you. Prince Giantpain roars. Take this. He instantly summons a long sword from his conscience and slashes it straight at Emo Lien. Beside him, Ma Shurchen can't help but cover her face. Just how much does this person want to be abused? She actually bolted directly towards Crown Prince Emo with her doors wide open like this. Needless to say, Crown Prince Emo probably had several hundred ways to subdue this guy in one move. However, Prince Emo chooses the most humiliating method. He directly kicks Emo Kun's refined and handsome face, sending him flying backward and falling to the ground with a thud. Ah! Emo Kun simply doesn't know what he just experienced. His handsome and confident image, his face has all been tossed into the sea of forgetfulness at this moment. His anger completely erupts in a split second. He suddenly waves his hand and roars, Berserk Bear! A giant bear with brown glossy fur abruptly burrowed out of his spirit beast space, glaring at Crown Prince Emo like a tiger eyeing its prey as it roared. Bang bang bang. That huge bear takes large strides and rushes towards Prince Emo. Arbor suddenly roars in anger. Blazing blood. Shriek. The blazing blood fire phoenix suddenly appears. Without any explanation, a line of fire burns towards the huge bear's body. They actually dared to bully her Lotus with numbers. They're simply tired of living. Arbor lightly flings his hand, and the little white snake on his wrist starts to swim. Its body gradually lengthens and it suddenly opens its huge mouth, revealing its sharp fangs. That huge snake's head is already in front of Prince Giantpain, and its huge mouth is aimed at his small and handsome face. It's as if it only needs to swallow him whole into its stomach. A certain prince is so frightened that his legs go soft, and he sits on the ground with a thud. His eyes are filled with fear as he stares deeply at the white snake in front of him. He swallows a mouthful of saliva, and for a long time he's practically in a daze, unable to recover his soul. Stop, stop, quickly stop. Prefecture Lord Gung Pengcheng is also about to be scared silly by the scene in front of him. If anything happens to Prince Giantpain here, then his position as Prefecture Lord will come to an end. Prince Giantpain only needs to casually assemble a group of people, and they can easily destroy him, the Prefecture Lord, 3 to 5 times. So Prince Giantpain absolutely cannot have anything happen to him in Shuntian Prefecture. Even more so, he can't die in Arbor's hands. So, Gung Pengcheng jumped up and quickly walked down the steps. He was just about to flick his sleeve across Xiaomu's palm. A terrifying force flew towards him, blocking all the spiritual energy he had used. Bang! The little white snake shakes its head and hits, instantly sending Prince Giantpain, who's almost pissing his pants, flying. Arbor leaps into the air and flies in front of Prince Giantpain. He glances at him coldly, then reaches out and takes back the little white snake. Prince Emo has also floated to Arbor's side at this time. Relative? Arbor turns to look at the Crown Prince to confirm. It's fine. Seeing that he's asking for a beating, I'll beat him up even if he's a relative. Prince Emo raises his hand and waves. Blazing blood. Wait. Seeing that the damned fire phoenix is about to pounce down again, Prince Giantpain, who's terrified, can't help but cry out. I'm not feeling well, so I'll catch up on 2 more chapters before 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. Chapter 2072. Wait a minute. Who's waiting for you? The blazing blood fire phoenix swooped down and flapped its wings viciously, causing the crown prince of Giantpain to stumble twice on the spot. He rolled to the edge of the table and his big head knocked onto the green brick floor, breaking it instantly. Crown Prince! Crown Prince! Everyone cried out in alarm and stood up in unison. At this moment, the Crown Prince of Giantpain was already in a very sorry state. He had probably never experienced such an embarrassing situation in his entire life. At the same time that he was panting heavily, his originally delicate and pretty face was also incomparably distorted. How dare you? Smack. The blazing blood fire phoenix's claw landed heavily on the Crown Prince of Giantpain's head. Before he could finish shouting, this brat was once again thrown out by the ancient phoenix. This time he crashed straight onto the female guest's table, causing a series of hurried and panicked screams. Plop, plop. The Crown Prince of Giantpain rolled down from the table in front of the 2 pale-faced women. He lay on the ground, gasping for air more than he exhaled. His throat made a loud sound and he directly fainted from anger. Arbor swept a glance over the messy banquet in front of him, and paid special attention to Gung Pengcheng's greenish-black face. Her little hand gently tugged at Emolien's sleeve, and the little fellow blinked and asked, "Husband, are they crazy?" "It's obvious." Emolien pulled her little hand and turned to leave. Since so many unpleasant things had happened, what was the point of staying here? Wait. Seeing that they were about to leave, Gung Pengcheng immediately thought of something, and hurriedly turned around and walked forward. He originally wanted to block their way, but when he thought of the heavy power of the young man's sleeve that had almost slapped him away, he thought of the young man in black clothes who had just swept his sleeve. His eyelids involuntarily twitched, and he hurriedly took 2 steps back, standing 10 steps away from the 2 of them. He smiled apologetically and cupped his hands, saying, "The 2 of you just now was just a small misunderstanding. The Crown Prince of Giantpain is an honored guest from the Divine Prefecture, and you are also guests invited by this old man. I hope that both sides can get along harmoniously." He Shurchen couldn't help but chuckle. Get along harmoniously? How can we get along harmoniously when we've already fought to this extent? Man or head? A calm voice came from behind them. Emolien and Arbor looked up and saw a woman in a pink-green satin gown and a pair of gold-plated tasseled hairpins walking towards them. Beneath her lustrous white skin were rosy cheeks, willowy eyebrows and vermilion lips. She was a natural beauty. Unfortunately, compared to the little stoic's expressionless face that was as clear as the cold moon, this graceful and beautiful appearance was forcefully suppressed by several levels. This stoic face didn't need any expression. As long as he stood there, he could make all the women in the world pale in comparison. It's third Miss Mu. Gung Pengcheng turned around and politely cupped his hands towards the girl. He laughed and said, "Third Miss, don't worry. It's nothing serious. These are all little friends that I invited." Mu Rose slightly furrowed her brows and swept her gaze across Arbor. Her gaze seemed to pause on Prince Emo for a moment. "Mr. I seem to have met you before." Gung Pengcheng was taken aback and he deliberately sized up Emolien. He had always wanted to clearly investigate the identities and backgrounds of these people beside Arbor. However, it was very strange. It seemed like every time he investigated a crucial point, some information would always be erased. However, from the looks of it now, this man beside Arbor, whether it was his cultivation or identity, didn't seem to be that simple. Chapter 2073. Emolien's eyes were tranquil and unperturbed, so don't even think about reading anything from his expression. Dao Wuji by the side cannot help but laugh. "Miss, your way of striking up a conversation is not very reliable." Mu Roku's face turns slightly red as she mumbles, Not at all. She is indeed not striking up a conversation, as if she has really seen this man somewhere before. She dares to swear that she has definitely seen this man's exquisite and unadorned face before. But where did she see it before? For a moment she actually cannot remember. Air. The screams of a few attendants allow Mu Roku to regain her senses. She gracefully bows towards Gung Pengcheng. "I am going over to see how Air is doing." "Hey." Gung Pengcheng is also somewhat helpless at this moment. He had seen Arbor and the others clearly. If there is any serious injury, then there is definitely no such injury. It's just that this face can be thrown all the way to the sea of forgetfulness. Air Giant Pain was obviously angered to the point of fainting because of his ugliness. Gung Pengcheng, what do you want? Speak. After experiencing such a farce, Arbor is too lazy to continue feigning civility with this person in front of her and directly asks. This miss, could it be that you have some misunderstanding towards me? Manor Head Gung's eyes flash as he says with a smile. Today, I invited your top academy here because I indeed have a small matter to discuss with you. This Manor Head hopes to hire your academy's teachers and students to work for our Shuntian prefecture. As for the price, it is easy to discuss. Arbor's face is cold as she raises her hand to stop him. Gung Pengcheng, can you stop pretending? I don't believe that you don't know who I am. Get straight to the point. What is your motive for calling me here today? Manor Head Gung's eyelids keep twitching as he thinks. If it wasn't for the fact that you have so many experts by your side, I would have already killed you right here. This damned little monster. In a moment of carelessness and inattentiveness, I actually allowed her to grow to such an extent. Mu Rook stretched out her hand and gently pressed on the Crown Prince of Giant Pain's chest. She helped the Crown Prince of Giant Pain, who had let out a long sigh of relief, sit up. Is the Crown Prince all right? The Crown Prince of Giant Pain stared blankly for a moment before he suddenly thought of something. His entire face turned gloomy. Where are they? Are you all dead? Mo Kuan shouted angrily. Can't you take him down for me? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Their hearts were in turmoil. Just now, that stoic-faced little girl summoned an ancient fire phoenix and a white snake with a wave of her hand. Even the air wasn't a match for the little girl and her group. What could these small fries do if they were to rush up? In the end, he still ended up being beaten up. Mo Kuan did not care what these people were thinking. He kicked the butt of one of his confidants. Go. If you can't hold it, then chop it off for me. I'll take responsibility if he dies. Wait. An idea flashed through Mu Roku's mind. She suddenly jumped up and stood in front of the numerous attendants, shouting loudly, No, you can't do it. Damn it, she remembered now. She had seen this handsome man somewhere before. In the palace. That day, when the emperor was choosing a consort for the crown prince, she had walked past a pavilion and caught a glimpse of the crown prince's portrait. Tall and slender, elegant and natural. It was as if the myriad of words in the world were unable to describe the man in the portrait. The Divine Province's crown prince, Mo Lien. Chapter 2074. Mu Roku, what are you doing? The Crown Prince of Giant Pain glared at Mu Roku, his eyes almost reflecting substantial killing intent. This woman actually dared to disobey him in front of everyone. He was the Crown Prince of Giant Pain, someone with such a noble status. How could a mere daughter of an aristocratic family like her casually disobey him? Truly a bastard. The Crown Prince of Giant Pain glared coldly at Mu Roku. You better give me a reasonable reason. Otherwise. Mu Roku quickly walked forward and hurriedly came to the Crown Prince of Giant Pain's side, whispering into his ear. Mo Kuan's expression changed slightly. He raised his head to look at Arbor and Mo Lien, then turned to look at Mu Roku and asked in a low voice, Is this true? The Crown Prince of Giant Pain had always been an ignorant and incompetent hedonistic son. He had been used to eating, drinking and playing since young and had never cared about the country's political affairs. He also knew very little about the Divine Province's Crown Prince, whom he had never met before. He wasn't a shrewd person and his face reflected all his emotions clearly. Mu Roku's words indeed made him feel very surprised. However, absolutely true. Mu Roku nodded and said, Ku'er's words are all true. There is absolutely no falsehood. Ku'er saw this with her own eyes. Crown Prince, if you become enemies with His Highness, how will you deal with yourself when you return to the Divine Province? The Crown Prince of Giant Pain pondered for a moment and coldly glanced at Mo Lien. His Highness. Whether he could return to the Divine Province alive, and whether he could secure the position of Crown Prince after returning to the Divine Province, was still unknown. Who didn't know that the Divine Province's Crown Prince had been wandering outside for many years and knew very little about the current political situation and regime of the Divine Province? If he returned, would he be able to grasp the lifeline and power of the Divine Province? Would he truly be able to sit on the divine province's crown prince position? He dared to be so arrogant and despotic before even going to the divine province. If he really allowed this person to secure the position of crown prince, would he, Mo-kun, have a good life? The crown prince of Jianping's eyes flickered and coldly said to Roku, Roku, don't spout nonsense. How could my cousin, the crown prince, appear in such a damned place? Seeing that Ro still wanted to say something, the crown prince of Jianping raised his hand to stop her. This crown prince only knows that the crown prince of the divine province has been wandering outside for many years. Whether or not he is the crown prince has yet to be verified. Alright, you don't have to say anymore. I know my limits. These people had beaten him up so arrogantly and they still wanted him to acknowledge their identities? Humph. It was simply a pipe dream. The crown prince of Jianping's face turned gloomy, and he suddenly raised his hand. What are you still standing there for? You. Shio. A flurry of arrows suddenly shot into the courtyard from outside. The arrowheads were aimed straight at the Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord and his wife. Madame Gong and Madame Feng stood up at the same time. Madame Gong and Madame Feng put their hands on the short table and leaped up horizontally. With a flick of their sleeves, they swept away 17 to 18 iron arrows. The hall was startled. Clang, clang, clang. Several dozen arrows fell to the ground. The rest of the people's expressions changed slightly as they blocked the iron arrows flying in front of them. Some of the cannon fodder bodyguards standing at the door unfortunately became the first wave of people to die an unnatural death in this round of attack. Arbor had already been caught by Prince Mo when he turned around. With a gentle sweep of his palm, the arrowheads that were flying towards them suddenly stopped in midair. They persisted in midair for less than a second before falling to the ground with a bang. They quickly turned into a pile of powder and dissipated. Chapter 2075. This sudden assassination was aimed at Manor Lord Gong and his wife, so Arbor and the others had nothing to do with it. They coldly watched as Gong Pengcheng and his wife engaged in a life-and-death struggle with a large group of assassins who had jumped down from the high walls. Arbor and the others simply stopped and leisurely walked to the side to watch. In any case, the assassins were the manor lord and his wife, so it had nothing to do with them. There was no need for them to intervene in an inexplicable assassination. Manor Lord Gong and his wife, Madame Feng, fought as they retreated. Soon they were surrounded by the group of assassins. Arbor only felt that everything in front of her was quite dramatic. The fact that the assassins who had jumped down from the walls were able to enter the main manor of Shantian Prefecture so smoothly showed that the defenses of Shantian Prefecture were not worth mentioning. Could it be that Gong Pengcheng and the palace lord of the Palace of Cold Blood were this weak? Under the assassination of a group of inexplicable assassins, they could not resist at all? Was the acting real or fake? Arbor pursed her lips and exchanged a look of understanding with Mo Lien, who was looking down at her. After silently preparing for battle, Qiao Mu summoned the ferrule from her conscience into her hand. As expected, Manor Lord Gong shouted, and many Shantian Prefecture guards suddenly appeared from outside the main hall. They caught the group of assassins and the two sides began to fight. Suddenly, the sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. Mo Lien did not even raise her head. She quickly reached out to pick up Arbor and jumped onto Seventh Yan's back. The golden dragon transformed into its beast form in midair. With a slight twist, its dragon tail landed on the eaves with a bang, shattering a large piece of debris and scattering it down. In an instant, Gong Pengcheng's expression changed greatly. He really did not expect that the couple would have ancient sacred beasts, a dragon and a phoenix, by their side. No wonder all the people he had sent out were like stones sinking into the ocean. They had probably been secretly taken care of. It turned out that the beasts by their side were so powerful. Gong Pengcheng muttered to himself for a moment and secretly gave a look to one of the guard leaders. The latter understood and shouted, "The main manor has been attacked with malicious intent. Everyone present cannot leave for the time being. Until everything is investigated, we can." Whoosh! A crossbow arrow fell from the sky and pierced through that person's chest. The guard leader was stunned for a moment. He lowered his head to look at his chest, then looked up in astonishment at the girl holding the crossbow on the dragon's back. Heavens, wasn't he not finished talking? The head of the guards died with a grudge. Even when he died, he didn't understand what had happened. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Xiao Mu didn't say a word, and her crow-repeating crossbow continuously shot out several arrows at a group of people wearing Shuntian Prefecture's guard uniform. When little Taisui and the others saw her make a move, they also followed suit and killed the Shuntian Hall's imperial bodyguards who had blindly surrounded them. For a moment the scene was inexplicably chaotic. Gung Pengcheng, the Shuntian Prefecture's manor lord, was even more stunned. Then he shouted angrily, "What are you two doing? This old man kindly invited people from your top academy to attend a banquet. Is this how you repay me? Indiscriminately starting to kill Shuntian Palace's imperial guards. What exactly do you people want to do?" Gung Pengcheng, the Shuntian Prefecture's manor lord, glared at Arbor's group with fury in his eyes. Arbor's lips curled into a cold smile. "Gung Pengcheng, are you retarded?" Chapter 2076. Everyone was speechless as they turned to look at the stoic-faced little girl. They didn't know why, but when they saw the little stoic standing on the dragon's back and looking down on everyone from high above, they inexplicably felt a bit amused. "Do you think everyone else is as stupid as you? These two groups of people are all your people," Arbor said coldly as he gazed at the assassins brandishing their machetes. "They're even using the same model of machete. Can you be more careful when you're arranging the act? Don't you think there's something wrong with your IQ when you're seen through with a single glance?" When everyone heard Arbor's words, they couldn't help but glance back. Sure enough, they were rendered speechless when they discovered that the group of assassins, who had previously shot arrows at them and jumped down the wall to surround them, were truly the same model as the machetes in the hands of the city lord's estate's royal guards. Gung Pengcheng couldn't help but twitch his eyebrows, and he glared hatefully at Arbor. "Cunning and argumentative. You don't need to say more. You must have brought these assassins over, right? You're still slandering this prefecture lord now. Don't think you can pin the blame on this prefecture lord." Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord Gung Pengcheng reprimanded angrily. "Men, seize them for me first." In a split second, a large number of royal guards surged out from the four corners of the courtyard. They held a type of long cylindrical weapon in their hands and abruptly fired it into the sky. A fine net shot out from each cylindrical tube. What was shocking was that after these hundreds to thousands of fine nets fell into the air, they actually connected seamlessly and ultimately formed a giant net that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, leaving no room for escape. Haha. Arbor sneered. So they were waiting for her here. It looked like Prefecture Lord Gung had probably simulated today's capture scene with his lackeys many times. Otherwise, how could they cooperate so well? The first step was to hypocritically invite her to the estate for a gathering. The second step was to write, direct, and act out the scene of the assassins attacking and the royal guards retaliating. The third step was the current highlight, directly shedding all pretense of cordiality and capturing her. Did she think that these broken nets made of special materials would be able to trap her? Plang. An arrow from Arbor fell into the net and almost bounced back. Looking at the large gray net that connected together above their heads, Xiao Mu quickly shrunk back into Mo Lian's arms and complained in a huff, "Hubby, this stinky net bounced my crow gold arrow back. This was really hard." Hearing this, Mo Lian immediately extended 2 clusters of dark sacred fire from her fingertips. "Just burn it." When the 2 wisps of faintly discernible black flames landed on the huge net above him, the complacent Gung Pengcheng didn't even have the time to appreciate the inescapable net he had set up before he saw clusters of black flames engulfing him. The sturdy net that had bounced the black gold arrows back quickly melted into droplets of liquid under the scorching heat of the black flames. Prince Mo's eyes lit up, and he immediately took out a porcelain bottle to collect the liquid. "If you use this quenched liquid together with the Arctic star sand, your pharaoh will definitely be forged into a divine tool." After saying this, Crown Prince Mo creased his brows in distress. "It's just that my bronze furnace is a bit too shabby and can't support the forging of a divine weapon. It might explode halfway through the forging process." The little fellow hurriedly asked, "Do you have any good forging furnaces?" "If you want a good forging furnace, the Forgetting River furnace is the best." Wait. Chapter 2077. It's a pity that it's said to be buried in the secret realm of the Sea of Forgetfulness. How many people have entered the secret realm of the Sea of Forgetfulness and returned empty-handed? Mo Lian sighs with emotion, then says, "The second-ranked refining furnace, the heavenly forging furnace, is now in the hands of an extremely famous divine weapon master in Divine Prefecture. Presumably he's also unwilling to give it up. Arbor blinks. Who is that person? It's said that he's a descendant of Xuanji. Emolienne shakes her head. Very few people have seen him. He's a guy who appears and disappears unpredictably. Usually he lives under the snowy mountains near the Sea of Forgetfulness, and his whereabouts are hard to find. Arbor calculates in her heart. Then can't she drag him out and beat him until he gives up on the heavenly forging furnace? After all, even Emolienne says that person's whereabouts are a mystery. It seems that finding him will be a difficult matter. Then we can only look for him again. Is there no divine weapon similar to the heavenly forging furnace? There is, but I reckon that we'll have to go to Divine Prefecture's Ghost City to take a look. Emolienne winks at her. Wife, after we go back together, you have to accompany me to buy it. The things in the Ghost City are expensive. Sometimes even a small forging material can be sold for a sky-high price. No problem. Arbor nods her head with an I'll pay look. She raises her little paw and pats Emolienne's chest. When the time comes, I'll definitely buy you the best forging furnace. Emolienne reaches out to hug the little guy, rubbing her face. Jojo is so good. And Gung Pengcheng, who's glaring at them from below, is probably already bursting with anger. How can there be such a shameless person in this world? Not only does he use a strange kind of fire to roast her giant net, but he also collects all the liquid after the roasting and steals it as his own. Such a bad habit is not worth mentioning. The most shameful thing is that in this tense fighting situation, this adulterous couple actually has the face to chat and laugh with him above. Disgusting. Simply shameful. Gung Pengcheng roared, "Release the arrows." This time they didn't conceal themselves anymore. The row of black-clothed assassins from before all flashed the bows and arrows at their waists. With a flurry of arrows they shot towards Qiao Mu and company like a rain of arrows. This batch of arrows contained extremely powerful spiritual energy. When they were fired, little Taisui, the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal, and the others could sense it. However, these arrowheads, which were full of spiritual power, were like children's toys in front of them. They were caught in their hands and with a light twist they fell to the ground. Damn it! Gung Pengcheng's eyes were green with anger. Set up the formation. After a furious roar, the large number of assassins and guards on the field mixed together and slowly set up a large formation. The venerable Peach Blossom Immortal, little Taisui, and the others had already leaped into the air. They stepped on the backs of everyone's heads and leaped into the air. Hey, I'm not going to play with you anymore. Yuan Shurchen looked at the people below with a smile. With a flick of his sleeve, it was as if peach blossoms filled the world. Everyone seemed to be in a sea of pink flowers, and their eyes were filled with slowly falling peach blossom petals. This scene was so beautiful that it mesmerized their hearts. For a moment, even the palace master of the Palace of Cold Blood, Madame Feng, was stunned. She stopped and stared blankly at the scene of dancing petals filling the sky. Until a blood-curdling scream came from someone's throat which was bubbling with blood. Madame Feng was shocked and immediately recovered. She hurriedly activated her defensive barrier and cried out, "Be careful." Chapter 2078. How was this a beautiful peach blossom rain? It was clearly a peach blossom massacre that took people's lives. The stench of death permeated the air, causing everyone to feel suffocated in an instant. These peach blossom petals were like sharp weapons, falling piece by piece, cutting open everyone's bodies. Once the peach blossom petals brushed past their necks, it was only death. Several people fell beside them. Crown Prince Jianpane Mo Kun, who had activated all the defensive devices on his fingers, wished he could dig a hole and bury himself immediately, saving himself from coming into contact with the peach blossom of death. At this very moment, an incomparably cold aura approached. Crown Prince Jianpane felt from the bottom of his heart that this was the aura of death. This strange thought in his mind caused Crown Prince Jianpane to tremble uncontrollably. His pleading gaze swept towards Gung Pengcheng and his wife, but the latter did not even look at him. On the contrary, Mu family's third miss, Mu Roku, who had been standing beside him, appeared much calmer. She only activated her defensive barrier and quietly stood beside him. She did not make a fuss or scream in pain like Crown Prince Jianpane. In Mu Roku's opinion, screaming at this moment was completely meaningless. Screaming could only show one's fear and terror. Would it make the enemy give up on killing them? It was obviously impossible. Therefore it did not matter if she screamed or not. Mu Roku forcefully calmed herself down and reached out to tug at Crown Prince Jianpei's sleeve. Crown Prince, don't scream. You have 3 defensive barriers on your body. Pay attention to maintaining your own spiritual energy. Don't let it be depleted too quickly. Otherwise, the defensive barriers will not be able to hold on. Mu Roku's reminder allowed Crown Prince Jianpei, who was in a state of collapse, to clear his mind. Thinking that Mu Roku's words were not wrong, he hurriedly nodded. His eyes were still trembling as he looked at the people in the peach blossom rain. There were already many people who had fallen to the ground, unable to get up. Some had their throats slit and died on the ground. There were even more who had their hands and feet cut by the peach blossom petals. At this moment, the front of the hall was filled with people rolling back and forth. At a glance, it was extremely unbearable. Gung Pengcheng used the tip of his foot to kick a guard who had fallen by his feet and angrily shouted, get up for me." However, that person's thigh had been cut by the peach blossom petals. At this moment he was hugging his thigh and rolling back and forth, howling in pain. Naturally, he wouldn't listen to him and immediately get up. When Crown Prince Jianpei saw that Gung Pengcheng was helpless against the situation before him, he couldn't help but panic. He hurriedly looked at Mu Roku and said, shouldn't we retreat first?" Mu Ro couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Retreat? Where could they retreat to? Ever since that man with an extremely high cultivation base had made his move, he had set up restrictions all around the central room, making it impossible for them to escape. The Crown Prince of Jianpei's nagging sounded in her ears. I am the Crown Prince of Jianpei. Since that person is my cousin, he shouldn't treat me like this, right? Do you think he'll let us go if we go and claim our kinship? Mu Ro couldn't help but smile bitterly again. Could it be that this young master didn't understand? If he really cared about that bit of kinship, would the Crown Prince have been so ruthless to him before? Stop, quickly stop. Crown Prince Jianpei, who clearly didn't wait for her answer, took the initiative to act. Mu Ro couldn't stop him even if she wanted to. Crown Prince Jianpei knelt on the ground with a plop. Chapter 2079. Very dramatically, that guy clasped his hands together and cried bitterly, Your Highness the Crown Prince Mo Kuan. The King of Jianpei's son Mo Kuan, your younger cousin. That shameless look of finding his biological brother from 800 years ago was almost breathtaking. Damn it, you only just found out that Mo Lien is your brother? Where did that ferocious look and arrogance go? Wasn't it because you were scared out of your wits by the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal? Arbor lowered his head to look at the King of Jianpei's heir, who was kneeling on the ground and cupping his hands toward the sky. He frowned and said with disdain, How can you have such a brother? It was simply too embarrassing. Mo Lien also felt ashamed, especially when he saw his little wife's disdainful gaze. He felt even more stifled. The fury in his gaze that was fixed on Mo Kuan soared. The wind from his palm landed, directly lifting Mo Kuan onto his back. Don't call me brother. Who's your older cousin? Scram. Mo Kuan was stunned, and a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face. He hurriedly got up and crawled forward on all fours, crying bitterly, Older cousin, I am Mo Kuan, the King of Jianpei's son Mo Kuan. Woo, my father is your imperial father's youngest brother. Older cousin. You can't kill me, you can't kill me. He was almost scared to death now. That madman who scattered peach blossoms had set up a peach blossom rain and easily took away the lives of dozens of guards. He didn't want to die like them without knowing why. He wanted to live. No matter what, he couldn't be killed by a few small peach blossom petals. So cowardly. Arbor swept a disdainful glance at Mo Lien. His meaning couldn't be clearer. You actually have such a cowardly brother? Is everyone in your Mo family a coward except you? I don't want to bother with you anymore. Embarrassing. Not to mention that this person had several defensive shields on him. Those falling peach blossom petals didn't even penetrate his defenses. Even if he had lost all his spiritual energy and defensive shields, he shouldn't be begging for mercy in such a cowardly manner. As the saying goes, a warrior prefers death to humiliation. What Crown Prince of Jianpei? He was simply a big coward. Mo Lien couldn't help but fly into a rage, and he directly slapped the vassal prince of Giant Pain across the air. Scram! Unexpectedly, when the crown prince of Giant Pain heard this, not only did he not get angry, he even shed tears of gratitude. He repeatedly bowed with both hands and said, Okay, I'll scram immediately. Cousin, don't worry, I won't appear in front of you for no reason. Everyone was dumbfounded as they watched the man turn his head and roll on the ground twice before he scrambled to his feet and ran out in a panic. They looked away in an instant and everyone looked at Prince Emo with strange gazes. Ha, Senior Celestial, look at how scared you are. Dao Wuji laughed awkwardly and couldn't help but tease. Hichim was baffled. Was this crown prince of Giant Pain out of his mind? Did he think that those falling peach blossom petals would randomly attack people? Every single petal was under his control, okay. Otherwise, why didn't the peach blossom petals attack his, crown prince of Giant Pain's, defensive shield when they fell? Did he think that with just his level 3 spirit artifact defensive shield, he could withstand a senior celestial's killing move? For Prince Mo's sake, she wouldn't kill him, okay? Darling Qiao pulled husband Mo's hand away and threw his hand to the side, facing him with the back of her head. Chapter 2080. Emo Lien hurriedly reaches out to hug her, once again bringing her to his side. He comforts her, Don't worry, I don't have such a cowardly brother. When we get back, immediately remove his name from the genealogy. Prince Emo lowers his voice by her ear, I definitely won't let my Jojo lose face. Arbor snorts, Your relatives in Shenzhou don't tell me they're all like this? Emo Lien. What's with this indescribable stifled feeling? His little wifey always dislikes him. No, they won't. Emo Lien braces herself to say. In fact, there really are quite a few troublesome characters among those relatives in Shenzhou. Emo Lien hurriedly grasps his wifey's small hand. Let's ignore them, let's go. Jojo, let's talk about Shenzhou's ghost city. Forcefully changing the topic. On the side, the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal sweeps a rather disdainful glance at Emo Lien. Emo Lien naturally notices the look in Xing Jiechen's eyes. Taking advantage of when Jojo isn't paying attention, she also throws him a cold glance. The group descends from midair. After half a day's effort, the giant net above their heads has long dissipated, and Emo Lien's porcelain bottle has accumulated more than half of the solution. After putting away the porcelain bottle, Emo Lien takes Arbor's small hand and walks out. The sound of a sharp arrow piercing through the air comes from behind the two people's heads. Emo Lien doesn't even turn her head, directly reaching out with her hand and throwing out a purple flame. Like a tiny purple dragon, the flame whooshes through the air, crackling as it wraps around the arrow that's coming straight at them. In a flash, the arrow that's flying towards them is completely eliminated. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Arbor suddenly turns around, shooting 10 black gold arrows at the palace master of the Palace of Cold Blood. Fengshe probably didn't expect this little girl to move so quickly. In a single turn, 10 black gold arrows are fired at the same time. She dodged 6 or 7 of them, but in the end she couldn't dodge the remaining 2 or 3. Of the 3 black gold arrows, one shot off a lock of her long hair, the second shot into her shoulder and the third shot into her hand. Their power spread outwards from within her body, penetrating her bone marrow. With 2 whooshing sounds, the arrows shot out of her body. That heart-wrenching pain made Madame Feng scream involuntarily. Master. Fairy Ling Fei followed the sound and hurriedly rushed over to support the tottering Madame Feng. Fairy Yellow Crane also hurried forward. Just as she reached out to help Madame Feng, Fairy Ling Fei slapped her hand away. Get lost. Don't touch Master, Fairy Ling Fei rebuked angrily. Isn't that woman your benefactor? Friends, did you see that? She was so ruthless to her master. If you are still Master's disciple, then pick up the sword on the ground and fight her with your life. Immortal Huang He's lips quivered as she gazed at Qiao Mu in bewilderment. Little benefactor. You're still calling her benefactor. Fairy Ling Fei rebuked angrily, kicking her back. Are you an idiot? She's already made a move on Master. Senior sister there. There must be some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding my ass. You and I both saw with our own eyes that woman hurt Master to this extent. Arbor glanced coldly at Fairy Ling Fei. Seeing little Yellow Crane look over, he gave a rare explanation. Your master shot us in the back. That arrow was imbued with divine power, Emo Lien said coldly. If he hadn't been by his wife's side just now, she would have suffered greatly from the divine power on the arrow. Chapter 2081. Fairy Yellow. He looked at Madame of Foam with a distressed expression and then looked up at Fairy Ling Fei. She hastily grabbed her sleeve and shouted, "Why? Why did Master shoot arrows in the back?" "Shut up." Fairy Ling Fei angrily flung her hand away and reprimanded, "You believe what others say? Did you see Master shoot arrows in the back with your own eyes?" Fairy Yellow. He drooped her head and reached out to help Madame of Foam up, but Fairy Ling Fei slapped her hand away. "How dare you be so arrogant in Shantian Prefecture? What kind of background do you have?" Fairy Ling Fei snorted angrily. "Regardless of your background, anyone who dares to make a move in my Shantian Prefecture and injure our family's mistress will die." Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord also had a gloomy expression as he stood behind them with his hands behind his back. The entire Shantian Mansion's main hall was now densely surrounded by layers upon layers of Shantian Mansion's guards. At a rough glance, Shantian Prefecture actually mobilized more than 1,000 people. "Prefecture Lord, let's talk nicely." Third Miss Mu Ro pursed her lips and suddenly walked to the center of the main hall with a flick of her sleeves. She stood in front of Arbor's group and bowed to Geng Pengcheng. "Prefecture Lord, you must have heard what Prince Jianpain said just now. This is His Highness Mo Lien, the Crown Prince of Shenzhou. You can't do this. Quickly withdraw your troops. Don't let the misunderstanding continue to grow." Mu Ro gave Shantian Prefecture's prefecture Lord Geng Pengcheng a fierce look and transmitted her voice. "If His Highness the Crown Prince is harmed in any way, you won't be able to bear the consequences of the Emperor's anger. Besides, it looks like you're no match for the Crown Prince's group at all. Why do you have to forcefully detain him and make both sides suffer instead?" Just now, the Crown Prince of Jianpain was making a ruckus so loud that everyone knew about it. The Shantian Prefecture's prefecture lord, Geng Pengcheng, naturally saw that obsequious appearance of his. He already knew why it was so difficult to find information about the people around Arbor. It turned out that the black-robed young man was His Highness the Crown Prince of Shenzhou. And what he found was only the identity of Mo Kingdom's Crown Prince on Sikong Planet. Geng Pengcheng naturally didn't care about the Crown Prince of a lower star region country. Of course, he was also puzzled as to why the Crown Prince's cultivation was so high. However, when he investigated further, he found nothing. Unexpectedly, this person was actually the Crown Prince of the Divine Land. Geng Pengcheng took a deep breath. He felt that he had to sort out his thoughts at this moment. Forget it. Since he was the Crown Prince of Shenzhou, it would be unrealistic for him to detain him by force, just as third young Lady Mu said. He would only be looking for trouble. Geng Pengcheng's old face was taut as he waved his hand to order the rows of Shantian Hall guards in front of the lobby to retreat several tens of meters. Mo Lien, Arbor, Yuan Shurchen, Little Taisui and the others were all standing there staring at the manor head with different expressions. "Manor Lord." Fairy Ling Fei couldn't help but call out, "Are you going to let it go just like that? What about Master's injuries?" The palace master of the Palace of Cold Blood hadn't been unconscious for long. She had already woken up and was looking at her husband, Geng Pengcheng. Geng Pengcheng muttered to himself for a moment before saying, "Ling Fei, this matter is mostly a misunderstanding. It was chaos when we fought just now and your master was injured for some reason." Fairy Ling Fei clenched her fists tightly. She wanted to say something else, but Madame Feng pressed her hand down and restrained her anger. Chapter 2082. Let's drop this matter. Geng Pengcheng thought for a moment and waved his hand. Madame Feng coughed lightly and stopped talking. Arbor sized her up and didn't say anything. She just raised her hand and tugged at the Crown Prince's sleeve. Mo Lien looked down at her with a smile. "Okay." Arbor nodded with satisfaction. Mo Lien looked up at Geng Pengcheng and said with a faint smile, "Principal Geng, may I have a word with you?" Geng Pengcheng was stunned. He wanted to refuse, but when he thought of her identity as the Crown Prince of Shenzhou, he felt that if he refused, she wouldn't let it go easily. So he walked over helplessly and followed the Crown Prince and Arbor into the inner room. "What does your highness want to ask?" Before Geng Pengcheng could finish his sentence, he was horrified to find a cluster of black fire floating in front of him. It was only for a moment, but it almost ignited his eyebrows and eyes. Geng Pengcheng was furious. He was about to explode when he realized that the world in front of him had changed. In an instant he was in a completely different environment. The crown prince of Shenzhou in front of him was gone. Arbor stood in front of him with a transparent onion head baby standing on her shoulder. Beside his calf, there was a small squarish lump of earth. It looked very strange, and on the lump of earth, there was a pair of black bean-like eyes. At this moment it was blinking and looking at him. Gung Pengcheng was a little surprised. He looked back and forth and was almost stunned by the expanse of peach trees in front of him. This is... Or... A giant snow leopard suddenly jumped out from behind and pounced, almost crushing him to the ground. Gung Pengcheng had a very bad feeling in his heart at this moment. Could it be that this damned girl had a grotto heaven immortal abode and land of inheritance? Was that why she suddenly seemed to be out of their control all these years? Like a wild horse out of its reins, she galloped further and further away? He was also shocked by her silent growth. Could it be like this? Arbor, you have the secret of the grotto heaven immortal abode. If the world finds out... Arbor suddenly smiled at him. Her eyes, which were already clear and bright like the moon, now looked even colder. Do you think you can leave this place alive? Don't be too arrogant. Before Gung Pengcheng could finish his sentence, he felt a heavy slap on his back. His entire body flew forward uncontrollably and fell to the ground with a bang. Just as he opened his mouth and was about to spit out a mouthful of blood, he was pulled into the air by Arbor's will. His entire body was wrapped in a mist. As for the blood he spat out, it dyed the mist barrier in front of him red. Arbor said with a look of disgust, "You almost dirted my paradise." Master Silver, don't worry. Dian won't let his stinky blood dirty our land." Only at this moment did Gung Pengcheng feel how small he was. It was as if in this place all of his actions were restricted. Even his spiritual energy was restricted by a terrifying pressure. He didn't know that this was the pressure of the small tree and that the entire star field was formed by the small tree. In the star field no one could touch Arbor. In this star field, Arbor was a godlike existence. Gung Pengcheng only thought that all of this was Arbor's doing. At this moment he felt an inexplicable sense of danger and couldn't help but tremble slightly. "Manor Lord Gung, you should feel honored. After all, as an enemy, you are the first person to enter my star field." Chapter 2083. Ordinary enemies can be dealt with outside. As for you, you are naturally different from them, Xiaomu stated dryly. "In my eyes you are a very special enemy." Gung Pengcheng inexplicably shuddered. He was wrapped in a cloud of water mist and no matter how he struggled he couldn't break free. He floated in the air looking down at Arbor with some surprise and cried out involuntarily, "Arbor, what did you do?" Under Arbor's signal, Dian waved its transparent little arm and pulled him down from the air. He was still wrapped in the thin transparent water membrane, but the water membrane in front of him was clearly dyed red by the blood that Gung Pengcheng spat out. "Are you an idiot? How dare you speak such nonsense in Master Silver's place, and speak disrespectfully to Master Silver?" The little water child waved its chubby little hand and snorted, "Answer my Master Silver's question properly, or I'll kill you right now." "Joe Arbor." "Paw." The snow leopard stretched out a paw and slapped the water ball heavily. So everyone only saw Gung Pengcheng, who was wrapped in the water membrane, fiercely bounce on the ground and jump high up. Gung Pengcheng only felt that under this slap, his internal organs turned upside down, and he was in indescribable pain. He had a feeling of wanting to vomit. Arbor immediately turned its big eyes away in disgust. But in a flash, Hu Shurchen's figure appeared next to her. Curling the corner of her mouth, Hu Shurchen looked meaningfully at Gung Pengcheng in the water membrane, stretched out a slender finger and pointed at Arbor's forehead. "You're really bold to actually let him in like this." Arbor clenched his hands and forcefully tightened them. "There shouldn't be anyone here who can see through Lotus's defensive barrier." "Indeed there isn't." Hu Shurchen nodded and looked at her with a deep gaze. "But everything is about what if. If word of this star field of yours gets out and evil people find out." Heechin sighed. "I'm worried about you." Arbor walked up to him and tugged at his sleeve. "I know." She was indeed a little impatient today. This Gung Pengcheng in front of her was the one who had caused her to fall into the abyss in her previous life. In this life he had repeatedly sent people to kill her. When she saw this person, she felt her blood boil. She simply couldn't endure it. Death? Did he think that death was his final destination? What a joke. The person who had caused her to suffer so miserably in both her previous and current lives was now in her hands. How could she just let him walk comfortably to his death? I'll take out his soul remembrance and you put Dunji's soul into this body. From now on, the Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord is yours. Hichin looked at her with a smile and said. When Arbor heard this, his eyes seemed to light up and his spirit was lifted. Stop at a stalk? That chatterbox? Last time she had conveniently thrown him into a corner of Taoyuan and made him face the wall to reflect on his past. With a flip of her hand, Arbor took the little Taisui into her dungeon and used her mind to absorb it into her hand. At this moment, the transparent little person in the dungeon looked at her with teary eyes and cried out bitterly, "Ah, my honorable little Master Silver, have you finally remembered the Dun Tun Tun in the corner of the peach garden? Don't be long-winded." Arbor glared at him and turned to look at Hu Shurchin with the little dungeon in her hand. Chapter 2084. Jichin, you goddamn bastard. I was banished to a corner by little Masta, and you don't even know how to visit me. You don't even know how to put in a good word for me. Back then, why did I fall in love with such a heartless and unscrupulous thing like you? Jichin looks at the figure in the dungeon with a strange expression. Why do I feel that Dunzin's words are a bit harsh to the ear? What's going on? Arbor punches that dungeon with his little hand. Shut up. Woo. Dunzin sobs pitifully. Peach Blossom Immortal wants to change a new body for you. If you keep crying woo, I won't change it. Dunzin instantly stops talking, his dog eyes widen as he looks at Arbor and repeatedly asks, Little Masta, what kind of body will you change for me? Is it beautiful? Is it elegant? Is my skin bright and clean? Arbor looks at him speechlessly. It's right behind you, see for yourself. Dunzin suddenly turns his head, his gaze blankly landing on Gung Pengcheng, who is enveloped by the water membrane. He immediately lets out a miserable cry. He's a baldy. How is he a baldy? Jichin snappily picks up the small dungeon in Arbor's hand. Change if you want. If you pass this village, there won't be another shop. Dunzin's tears fall. Little Masta, can't you change me into a prettier body? For example, someone like the Crown Prince who looks as gentle as jade, or someone like Jichin who is ravishingly charming will do too. You're the one who's beautiful and charming. Ma Shurchin punched the dungeon. Shut up. Woo. Then do you want to change? Yes. Having a body is better than floating without one. Dunzin has no other choice now, so he reluctantly nods and agrees. How depressing, this prefecture lord looks like he's over 50 years old. He doesn't look good at all and his sideburns are also bald. At first glance he looks like a hairless vulture. In the future he will have to carry this image in the pugilistic world for a long time. How depressing, how to deal with it. Yuan Shurchin was too lazy to pay attention to this ADHD-like transparent little person, and directly threw the dungeon into the air. He grabbed Gung Pengcheng's body with one hand and pressed his other hand on Gung Pengcheng's head. Gung Pengcheng's entire body was trembling. At first he could still call out, "What are you doing?" Gradually it turned into, "Ah, Your Honor, please spare my life." However, as the pressure gradually increased, Gung Pengcheng could no longer continue speaking. His entire body felt dizzy. When he opened his eyes again, he was horrified to find that his body was standing right in front of him. Lowering his head to take another look, his body had actually become transparent and illusory. This? Had his soul been seized? Oh, how could this be? Who was this person? Hu Shurchin merely glanced at him indifferently. With a flick of his sleeve, Gung Pengcheng's soul remembrance was sucked in by a heavy suction force and instantly fell into Hu Shurchin's hand. No, don't kill me. Arbor stood beside Hu Shurchin and coldly looked at the disheveled Gung Pengcheng. A faint light flashed through his eyes. The current situation was absolutely gratifying to everyone. However, she didn't feel much joy. It was as if the past was like floating clouds, and her mental state had inexplicably improved slightly. The three people's figures returned to the inner hall. Emolien heard the sound, slowly turned around and smiled at her. Chapter 2085. This is Dunju's new body? Emolienne's long brows raised slightly as she looked at the person shyly cowering behind He-Shurchen. Arbor shouted at him exasperatedly, "Hurry up and come over." Dunju hurriedly jumped in front of her, pulling a long face as he asked pitifully, "Master, if there's a chance next time, can you give me a handsome body again?" Such high standards. And handsome too. Where was she going to find a handsome man for him? Scram. Dunju sobbed. He-Shurchen, are you deliberately harming me? Look at Master, she doesn't like this body so much. You deliberately let me enter the body of Master's enemy so that Master doesn't like me. He-Shurchen's brows twitched. You're thinking too much. He knew that Jojo was going to settle accounts with Shuntian Prefecture. Right now he was letting Dunju enter Shuntian Prefecture as a spy. When the time came they could work together to eliminate all the enemies in Shuntian Prefecture in one fell swoop. Woo-woo. Keep crying and I'll kill you. He-Shurchen couldn't bear it any longer and glared at him. Emolienne only found it a little funny. She grasped Arbor's hand and pulled her to her side asking, "Jojo, did it go well?" Arbor nodded and glanced at the dungeon in He-Shurchen's hand. The dungeon that originally held Dunju was now Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord Gung Pengcheng's turn to stay inside. Master, this dungeon was made by little Taisui. It's very sinister. Day after day they would attack the divine consciousness inside. Oh, of course this old man is only a spiritual consciousness body now. He's not qualified to form divine sense yet. He can't even withstand a single attack. He's going to turn into ashes soon. Ah? No, don't. Shuntian Prefecture's Prefecture Lord Gung Pengcheng was immediately scared out of his wits. He repeatedly waved his hands and shouted, "Crown Princess, ask whatever you want. I will definitely tell you everything I know. I don't know if there's anything strange about this human soul body. It would be best not to leave him in Taoyuan. This is to prevent others from remotely obtaining information through his soul remembrance." He-Chen glanced at Gung Pengcheng. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. "You can do this?" Emolienne nodded. "Yes, it's best to be careful. Normally you can just throw him into the storage talisman and it won't be a problem." "All right." Xiao Mu grabbed this earthen prison and shook it vigorously. "I'll give you time to think it over properly. At this time tomorrow I want you to clearly explain everything to me from beginning to end. You know the consequences of lying to me." After saying that, he threw the earth prison into the storage talisman. The earth prison was created by little Taisui, who was a celestial venerable. Not to mention Gung Pengcheng, even a spiritual venerable like Dao Wuji would not be able to escape. Arbor looked up at Yuan Shurchen and Emolienne. The two nodded to him and glanced at the sobbing Dunzong at the same time. "Are you thinking of going back to the furnace to be rebuilt? If you don't like this body, I can help you get rid of it at any time. When the time comes, I'll refine you into a human. Would you like it? It's the kind of human puppet with blood coming out of its eyes. It'll scare ordinary people when it goes out." The black-hearted duo seamlessly connected their words. Their threatening words smashed into Dunzong's face. He was so scared that he immediately stopped crying. He no longer dared to make any more sobbing sounds. Be an honest person. Do you know what you're going to say when you go out later? Be smart. Chapter 2086. If I finish this matter, can I change into a handsome body? Sure. Emolienne nodded amiably and sized up Dunzong. As long as you finish this matter, you can change into whatever body you want. Male, female, old, young, tiger, leopard, wolf, snake, you can change as you wish. You don't fool me. Dunzong pointed at Emolienne and whined. I know. If my soul completely fuses with this body in the future, it will be very, very difficult to peel it off. Then do you want to come out right now? I can peel it off right now. Do you want me to peel it off? The quarreling duo came online again. After a round of angry insults, the weak Dunzong pitifully ran out and covered his face as he cried, "You two are bad people." Arbor had a speechless expression and raised his hand to tug at Emolienne's sleeve. "Isn't that bad? He's so weak, I don't know if he'll be exposed in 3 sentences in front of Madame Feng." "Don't worry," Yuan Shurchen said with a smile. "Dunzong is a quick-witted person. He looks funny but he can basically complete the tasks assigned to him properly. Master, if I sacrifice my body, I'll lose my chastity this time. In the future, Kiki must treat me well." Dunzong ran back again and ran away like a rabbit after saying this. Arbor had a baffled expression on his face and didn't understand at all. What did he just say he would sacrifice? Yuan Shurchen couldn't help but want to laugh. She coughed lightly and shook her head. Nothing. Arbor looked at Emolian blankly. It's just letting him pretend to be the Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture master. How can it rise to that level? Yuan Shurchen's mouth twitched. She thought that Dunzong wouldn't want to take this opportunity to do something with Sun Yang's middle-aged Madame Feng. Right at the three of them walked out side by side. Arbor said as he walked, Lotus, I want 10,000 pieces of jade just about the same size as the ebony pieces. Okay, Emolian nodded and looked at her with a smile. Can Jojo draw jade talismans now? Arbor nodded. I don't know if I can do it for the first time, but I think with more practice, practice makes perfect. Emolian patted her head and said, Of course. Back then Jojo was still a little girl in a small shop in a deserted village. She would be envious of a few blank talisman papers. In the blink of an eye he had become a profound great talisman master, and was able to draw jade talismans. Emolian sighed with emotion. She held Arbor's little hand and walked forward slowly. When the three of them walked out they happened to hear Dunju scolding his subordinates. Why are you making such a fuss? Go tidy up the rear courtyard and arrange for the guests to stay. Third young Miss Mu Roku, who had been waiting for them outside the central room, breathed a long sigh of relief and nodded approvingly at Dunju. It seemed that this Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord was also a smart person. Madame Feng walked forward with Fairy Ling Fei's help and apologized to Arbor and the others. This concubine was too anxious before and didn't know what to do. Fortunately, I didn't hurt the guests. Otherwise, this concubine's heart would really be uneasy. Arbor nodded. They didn't say anything more to Madame Feng and followed the page boy who led the way to a courtyard to rest. Before they left, they sneaked a glance at Madame Feng. They felt that this woman wasn't simple. The moment Arbor's gaze fell on Madame Feng's back, it automatically shifted away. Chapter 2087. She decided that it would not be too late to act after investigating what happened back then. In her opinion, Gung Pengcheng was no different from a dead man. Before that, she had to clarify some things. The next afternoon, Arbor and his group, who had rested for the night, were invited to the main hall of Shuntian Prefecture. In order to entertain everyone, Prefecture Lord Gung, oh no, Dunju, not only did he invite Arbor and his group, he also invited many sect masters of Shuntian Prefecture. Madame Feng sat beside Dunju with exquisite makeup. Huang He and Ling Fei stood behind her. The banquet was filled with singing and dancing. Everyone toasted each other and chatted happily. Many sect masters brought their children to attend the banquet. Although they did not say anything, their eyes seemed to wander around the main seats. Prince Imo and Miss Chow sat there. Although they did not speak, they inexplicably made people feel wary. Ha ha ha. Suddenly, a bald middle-aged man with a big round face stood up from his seat. He raised his cup and smiled rudely at Dunzong. Manor Lord Gung, this must be the Crown Prince of King Jianpain from the Divine Land. No one knew that the Crown Prince of Jianpain had already left Shuntian Prefecture that night. Perhaps he had already returned to the Divine Continent. Dunju waved his hand and turned to Emolian and Arbor. Your Highness, Crown Princess, this is the sect master of Six Sons sect, Qing Guang. Dunju could not help but want to cry when he thought of these sect masters. Last night he had been kicked into Fish Orchid Planet by Hu Jiechen. He had read a lot of old and new information about Shuntian Prefecture. His eyes were red and swollen. He had spent 4 days on Fish Orchid Planet from one night to the next. He had memorized all the information that he needed to memorize. This feeling was extremely satisfying. Sect Master Qing Guang, this is the Crown Prince of the Divine Continent. He is not the Crown Prince of Jianpain you mentioned. That is the Crown Princess. The Six Sons sect's Qing Guang was instantly filled with reverence, and he turned to bow toward Emolian and Xiao Mu. My apologies for my lack of manners. This one didn't know that His Highness the Crown Prince had graced us with your presence. If my words have offended your Highness, please forgive me. His small Six Sons sect might be one of the top powers in Shuntian Prefecture, but in a place as big as Divine Continent, it could not even be considered as a small fry. Emolian didn't say anything and only nodded faintly. Although the sect leader of the Six Sons sect wanted to be on good terms with the Crown Prince, he could only sit down resentfully when he saw the Crown Prince's cold expression. Obviously, the Crown Prince of the Divine Land was not someone who liked to get close to people. When the other guests saw this, they hurriedly stood up and bowed to Emolien and Arbor. Soon after, they took their seats again. Both the host and the guest enjoyed themselves to the fullest. Madame Feng glanced at Dun Zong, who was sitting beside her, and frowned slightly. Madame Feng was unhappy that the prefecture master did not return last night. She sent someone to ask around this morning, but she didn't hear anything about the prefecture master spending the night with any of his concubines. Even the prefecture master did not spend the night with his new favorite vixen Min Yang. As she was thinking, she heard a crisp sound. Madame Feng looked up and her face darkened. The person who came was a woman with a graceful figure. Half of her face was covered by a white veil. Her cold eyes scanned the entire place. When they landed beside Emolien, she couldn't help but tremble. It's her? It's really her. Just like that, he sat there silently, his face still expressionless. She wasn't seeing things. Chapter 2088. The woman stared blankly in Prince Mo's direction for a long time until Madame Feng's reprimanding voice reached her ears. Min Yang, what are you doing here? Madame Feng's expression was ugly and her voice was not polite at all. The woman raised her head to glance at Madame Feng. She stood proudly and stared at her coldly. Min Yang is here to perform a dance on the orders of the prefecture lord. Madame Feng glared fiercely at Prefecture Lord Geng. Dun Zhu immediately laughed awkwardly. He thought that this was probably an agreement between Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord and this woman called Min Yang. He really knew nothing about it. Seeing the undercurrent between the wives and concubines, Dun Zhu hastily coughed dryly and said with a smile, "Since you're here, let's begin." This woman called Min Yang had a pretty good figure. What did she look like under the veil? Dun Zhu subconsciously rubbed his chin and smacked his lips. His gaze landed on the woman. When Madame Feng saw this, a trace of anger flitted across her face. She hatefully shifted her gaze away from the young woman. Damned slut. An unknown little slut from all walks of life dared to compete with her? Everyone, please wait for a moment. After Min Yang left, everyone repeatedly praised Prefecture Lord Geng for his ability to manage the household and for the harmony between his wives and concubines. They showered Dun Zhu with praise, making that fellow feel as if he was floating in the air. When Arbor saw this, she turned her little head to glance at Prince Emo. Unreliable. Emolien could not help but want to laugh. She raised her hand and squeezed her little hand. We'll have Jechen teach him a lesson later. Soon Min Yang appeared in front of everyone again. This time she had changed into a pastel dress and brought along 2 rows of coquettishly dressed dancers. When the music started, Min Yang began to dance. Her figure was extremely lithe. With a leap, she spun in midair. Green ribbons fluttered as the dancers flicked their sleeves, setting off the young woman who was as bright as the moon in midair. Min Yang's pink and colorful dress spread out in the air, forming a beautiful circle of flowers. The layers were as graceful as white clouds piled on top of each other. Her loose skirt slid from the air all the way to the ground. The transparent gauze wings at the end were like the wings of a colorful divine bird. At first glance it was truly shocking. Arbor hurriedly turned to look at Prince Emo, who was sitting beside him. Seeing him looking at her with a smile, she pretended not to see his mischievous gaze. She pursed her lips and said seriously, "So many people are looking at Min Yang. Why are you staring at me?" Prince Emo held the white jade cup in one hand, the sparkling wine inside slightly swaying. Her jade-like face was filled with smiles. He tilted his head and stared at her. He smiled and said, "No one is prettier than my wife." She couldn't deny that she was in a good mood at this moment. She felt a little refreshed, but Xiao Mu still snorted expressionlessly. Glip-tongued. "It's completely from the bottom of my heart." He reached out and caressed her smooth little face. Pink skeletons, beautiful women's bones. Everything is like smoke and dust that will eventually disappear. In this crown prince's eyes there's only my wife, Jojo. Arbor suddenly turned her little head and faced him with the back of her head. Her 2 little claws involuntarily reached out to cover her little face. It's over. Her heartbeat was beating irregularly again. It was fluttering as if it was about to struggle out of her heart. Chapter 2089. Miss Chiao reflexively checked her own pulse. Her pulse was steady, neither floating nor sinking, neither late nor late. Logically speaking, it should be very normal. But her heartbeat was unusually fast. Pfft. Emolien naturally saw her little movements and couldn't help but laugh out loud. He moved his head close to hers and said softly, "Baby, turn around and look at me. You keep looking at me with the back of your head. I'm panicking." Miss Chiao hastily covered her burning face with her hands. It was over. She always felt that this person's voice was very seductive. It was low and deep like rolling beads falling on a jade plate and even had a bit of magnetism to it. It was hard to believe that this man was flirting with her in front of so many people. Arbor suddenly turned her head to look at him, but didn't expect this man to move so quickly and steal a kiss from her lips. It really happened in the blink of an eye. Arbor's little fist reached out and landed in his palm. "Don't mess around." He laughed lowly. "Who's messing around?" Miss Chiao glared at him angrily. "Here, my little cutie, I've peeled an orange for you." Emolien's eyes narrowed slightly, and he reacted quickly by pulling his wife onto his lap. With a flick of his sleeve, he instantly deflected several arrows. Chi-chi, after a few light sounds, the arrows pierced into the pillars in the hall. Arbor started and looked back. She saw that the group of dancers who'd been singing and dancing had all summoned their weapons from their inner worlds and were charging in Dungeon's direction. Dungeon had been used to peace these past few years. When had he ever seen such a tense and exciting scene? He couldn't react in time. "My mother." Dungeon had the urge to immediately rush to He-Chin and hide behind him. Except that He-Chen's sudden and deep gaze alerted him. He immediately came back to his senses and sat upright on his throne, aggrieved. He didn't move at all. "You weren't scared, were you?" Emolien pulled Jojo over and stood 3 feet away from the table before looking down at her. Arbor blinked and couldn't help but roll her eyes at the sky. She was already at the 4th level of the spirit realm. How could she be frightened by such a scene? Chirp. Her cheeks were suddenly kissed by him. Arbor glanced at him and saw the man take a deep breath. He grabbed her little hand and pressed it against his chest. "But your husband is a little scared." Arbor. In such a tense atmosphere, he still had the mood to joke with her. Although they could sit on the sidelines and watch a group of dancers chase after Dunzong, from time to time they could point out a dancer's moves and analyze 1 or 2 of her moves. But he still had to be a bit more honest. Emolien giggled as he looked down at her. "Wife, these women are so scary. You must protect your husband well." The little fellow suddenly reached out and pinched his face. "Stop fooling around. If you don't save Dungeon now, I'm afraid Dungeon's body will be destroyed again." Emolien pulled down her little hand in amusement and nodded. "Hey. If you want me to save him, I'll save him." With that, he pointed a finger and blocked a few arrows that were flying in front of Dungeon. Dungeon had been frantically fending off the dancers' attacks. When he saw Emolien make a move, he couldn't help but tear up. His boss had finally finished flirting with Miss Chiao. He finally had the time to turn around and look at him, this pitiful person. "Bastard. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Wash your neck and prepare to die." Chapter 2090. When he heard this, Dungeon's mind was in a mess. He saw a pink figure charging straight at him with a bright silver sword in her hand. She was about to slash down at his face. Did Min Yong write, direct and act out an assassination drama? In the blink of an eye, he instinctively retaliated, throwing out a bolt of lightning that smashed onto Min Yong's sword. The sword couldn't bear the heavy blow and tilted slightly to the left. Min Yong's body sank. She rolled on the ground and got up again. She persevered and stabbed her sword at his chest again. Heavens! Dungeon frowned miserably. His entire face was scrunched up. He was a celestial venerable, but now he was trapped in the body of a spirit realm cultivator. It was really grieving. He suddenly felt that the world was full of malice toward him. Dungeon only felt that his vision was dark. He was a celestial venerable, a celestial venerable. That was a transcendent realm cultivator. Sob, sob, sob. He was actually being beaten up by a spirit realm woman. Sob, sob, sob. How big was the shadow in his heart right now? Bam. After Madame Fong threw a dancer out, her eyes flashed as she looked back at Dungeon. Lightning spirit? When did the mansion master cultivate the power of the lightning spirit? While she was thinking, A dancer pounced at her without any regard for her life. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws, full of anger as if she was determined to die together with her. Even if she was stabbed by the sword in her hand, she still charged at Madame Feng with the power of self-explosion. Madame Feng couldn't help but turn pale with fright. He kept retreating. That person didn't give up. Madame Feng's face was full of panic. She hurriedly reached out and dragged Fairy Ling Fei, who was standing behind her, over. She quickly and skillfully pushed Fairy Ling Fei out to block the power of the self-explosion. Bam! Senior Sister Ling Fei. The little yellow crane's face was full of disbelief, as if it was the first day it met its master. It stared at her in a daze. Just now what happened? Master actually pushed Senior Sister Ling Fei out to block the attack? She did so without any hesitation. It was as if Senior Sister Ling Fei was just a cat or a dog that could be used to amuse or block evil spirits for her master at any time. Although the kabuki was only a great mystic cultivator, the power of her self-detonation was not to be underestimated. Ling Fei was caught off guard and was caught in the middle of the explosion. Her cheeks were burned and her left eye was damaged by the explosion. The entire hall was shaking. Senior Sister. Fairy Yellow Crane cried out anxiously and hurriedly ran towards Fairy Ling Fei. Madame Feng's face darkened. She reached out to grab her disciple and advised, "Don't go over there." "Master, why are you doing this?" Fairy Huang He subconsciously brushed away her master's hand. Madame Feng's expression was somewhat gloomy. "I didn't do it on purpose. At that time, Ling Fei was standing beside me and I had no choice but to pull Ling Fei over to block the attack." He had no choice. Fairy Yellow Crane's face turned pale and translucent. "You want to use Fairy Ling Fei to block the evil spirit because you have no other choice? When did Master become so frightening and unfamiliar? Scoundrel, watch my sword." The masked woman Min Yang once again got up from the ground and stabbed the sword in her hand at Dunja. "Die, old man." Chapter 2091. Thinking quickly, Dunju quickly reached out his arms and clasped them together, catching the masked woman's long sword in his palms. He quickly snatched it away and threw it to the ground with a dong sound. At the same time he shamelessly pulled the masked woman into his arms. Slap. The woman immediately flicked her sleeve and gave him a heavy slap. This scene happened too quickly. By the time everyone reacted, they only saw a red palm print on Dunju's left cheek. A very distinct palm print was left behind by 5 fingers. The scene was too beautiful and some couldn't bear to continue watching. All of a sudden she really wanted to weep, but when she met Xiao Mu's calm and warning gaze she restrained herself a bit. He turned to the crowd and said, "Everyone, I'm truly sorry that such a thing happened at the banquet. Let's end today's banquet first. After this manor head has dealt with these people, I'll invite everyone to another banquet to apologize." Everyone saw the red palm print on his cheek and his appearance was a bit strange. They all held back their laughter and nodded before leaving. After everyone left Shuntian Prefecture's main hall, Dunju finally couldn't bear it anymore. He turned around and roared at the masked woman who had fallen to the ground and had her neck and shoulders held down by several Shuntian Prefecture's soldiers. "Don't hit people in the face, you know? This is too much." Min Yang. Manor head Min Yang dared to openly gather so many people to assassinate you. It's obvious that she doesn't put our Shuntian Prefecture in her eyes. Madame Feng said with conviction. "This woman must be executed immediately. If Manor Head can't bear to do it, this concubine can do it for you." "No need." Dunju waved his hand and stopped Madame Feng from continuing. "Return to your own court first. You don't need to interfere with the interrogation of Min Yang. Let me handle it fully." Madame Feng gritted her teeth and said word by word, "Manor Head Min Yang attempted to assassinate you first and then ruined the banquet. She also alarmed His Highness the Crown Prince and the Crown Princess. If we don't punish her, will there still be rules in the entire manor?" Dunju waved his hand impatiently. "I know how to deal with her." Seeing that Madame Feng was about to continue, Dunju said angrily, "All right, go back to your court first. I'll let you know the results." Madame Feng left in a huff. She glanced at Fairy Huang He, who was several hundred steps away from her, and pursed her lips. "Huang He, come with me." Fairy Yellow Crane looked at Arbor blankly. This child had just witnessed with his own eyes that his master had pushed his senior sister out as a shield. Until now, it seemed that he still hadn't recovered from the shock. Arbor couldn't bear it and asked, "Do you want to stay?" Huang He. Madame Feng raised her voice and glared at the motionless fairy Huang He with a hint of anger in her eyes. Fairy Yellow Crane seemed to have received her orders and came back to her senses. She quickly nodded and left with Madame Feng. Lord Geng ordered his men to move the corpses of Min Yang and the dancers into the backyard. Min Yang sat there silently. Suddenly she looked up at Arbor, who was standing not far away. Slim and elegant, she radiated the moonlight. She simply stood there, but it was as if the entire world had been lit up by her. "I want to see who exactly you are." Dun Zhu reached out his demonic claws and tore off the silk handkerchief on Min Yang's face without another word. Chapter 2092. The silk handkerchief fell down, but Xiaomu was a bit shocked and flabbergasted at the face behind it. Her icy gaze landed on Min Yang's face and she didn't say anything for a long time. However, Mo Lian, who was standing next to her, vividly sensed the fluctuations in her emotions. "What is it?" Mo Lian hastily pulled her to her side and hugged her waist, patting her comfortingly. "It's you." Arbor gritted her teeth and coldly stared at the woman. The woman lowered her head slightly and looked at the ground without saying a word. Little Taisui and the others glanced at Arbor in confusion. Judging from the little fellow's tone, it seemed like this woman called Min Yang was someone the little fellow knew. "Yilingmin, I thought you were dead already. I didn't expect you to still be alive." Arbor suddenly raised her hand, which contained layers of frost that gradually formed sharp icicles. "Little junior sister. No, you can't kill me right now. Little junior sister." Yilingmin abruptly looked up, her previously calm gaze gone, and her body trembled as she softly called out, "Give me a reason not to kill you." Arbor's tone was as cold as ice, and everyone could hear a tangible killing intent in her crisp voice. "Murong Sun is dead. Third Aunt Master is dead. Eldest senior sister, second senior sister, and the others are all dead." Arbor angrily roared in agitation. "Why don't you die? You're the one who harmed so many people in the sect. What reason do you have to continue living in this world? Shouldn't you go to hell and be their slave to apologize?" "Yes, I want to apologize. I will indeed die. But not now." Yilingmin abruptly looked up and stared straight at Xiaomu. She practically mustered all her strength to yell, "Not now. Little junior sister. There will be a day when I will willingly die. But not now." "Reason." Xiaomu stared at her frigidly and the icicles in her hand stood erect. Under the illumination of the setting sun, those icicles seemed to be plated with a layer of hazy yellow. Yilingmin crawled a few steps forward and said calmly, "I've already found some clues. Although that Lu Yizhi is from Shuntian Prefecture, he came to our sect to seize the sacred water entirely out of his own selfish desires. That's right. He saw you using the mythical water in the competition, so he wanted to steal it. Didn't Murong Sun tell you not to use the holy water in front of other people? What's the point of telling me this?" Xiaomu ruthlessly kicked Yilingmin to the ground, causing her to roll down several floors along the steps. "If you tell me all this, will my master come back to life?" "Yilingmin. Today I will clean up the sect on behalf of my master and get rid of a future trouble like you for the sect." Yilingmin's body trembled and she pounded the ground. "Little junior sister. You must not know about heavenly fate, right? What I'm investigating right now not only concerns our entire sect but also the future of our Sikong planet. You greedy coward. How dare you quibble in front of me?" "I'm not quibbling. I know Geng Pengcheng has a well-hidden private army. If we want to get rid of the entire Shuntian Prefecture, we must deal with this private army first. You don't need to worry about Shuntian Prefecture's affairs. Right now you just need to die obediently." Chapter 2093. The look in Yilingmin's eyes changed slightly. She suddenly turned around and shot backwards. She was fast, but she didn't expect Arbor to be even faster. In the blink of an eye, Arbor was already in front of her. In an instant, a layer of jade-like hands wrapped around Yilingmin's throat. Yilingmin was shocked. She thought that with her current cultivation she would be able to completely crush this junior sister. She didn't expect that after 3 years her junior sister's growth would be on par with hers. She had been in Shuntian Prefecture for the past 3 years. Her growth should have been faster than her junior sister's. But now that Yi Lingmin couldn't help but laugh bitterly. This was probably due to the difference in their talents. Little junior sister's growth speed was simply breathtaking. Yi Lingmin was quick-witted in a moment of desperation, and her entire body abruptly leaned backwards, evading Qiao Mu's fierce chokehold. However, her left shoulder was scraped by an ice spike. A thin cut appeared instantly. Yi Lingmin did 2 quick somersaults and dodged to the side. With one hand on the ground, she panted slightly. Yi Lingmin looked up at Arbor. "Why didn't you fight back?" Arbor asked coldly. "Junior sister. I won't fight back." Yi Lingmin gritted her teeth. She turned to look at Shuntian Prefecture's prefecture lord Gung Pengcheng. A trace of confusion flashed through her eyes. From the beginning until now, the mansion master had been standing there quietly. This action was too strange. She didn't have time to think. She flipped over and jumped onto the back of a goshawk that appeared in the sky. "Junior sister, I will definitely give you an explanation." Yi Lingmin threw out this sentence and flew away with the goshawk. Arbor didn't make a move. The others didn't either. Miss Qiao's eyes were like torches. She stared in the direction Yi Lingmin left. She suddenly turned around and walked out of Shuntian Prefecture without saying anything. In the courtyard of Shuntian Prefecture's matriarch, Madame Feng. "The Crown Prince of Shenzhou and the others have just left." Ahem. Madame Feng listened to the guard's report and nodded. Although she had grabbed the Ling Fei to block it, it was still the power of the explosion and it had happened at close range. The aftershock of the explosion had also affected her. In addition, he had suffered some injuries before, so his current condition was not very good. Ling Fei had been placed on a stretcher made of vines and grass. It was now parked outside the courtyard and looked to be on the verge of death. As for Fairy Yellow Crane, she stood far away in a daze, staring blankly at Madame Feng. Seeing her like this, Madame Feng's mood worsened. Madame Feng forcefully slapped the armrest of the chair, coughed a few times and angrily said, "Huang He, if you have anything to say, just say it." "Master, I feel that the matter of you pushing senior sister Ling Fei out. It was not right at all." Without waiting for Fairy Huang He to finish, Lady Feng's face darkened and she said angrily, "You don't need to care about this matter. Go and rest." "But master." "Shut up." Madame Feng flew into a rage out of humiliation and scolded, "Things have already come to this. What else do you want me to do?" Fairy Yellow Crane's head drooped. There were some different emotions in her heart as she slowly dragged her feet back to her courtyard. It was her master who had clearly told her to say whatever she wanted to say. In the end, she was chased away by her master before she could even finish a sentence. Looking at the boundless road ahead and the broken branches and shadows in the courtyard under the setting sun, Fairy Yellow Crane's heart felt stuffy, as if she was holding in a breath. It was very uncomfortable. Chapter 2094. When night fell, a heavy downpour accompanied by thunder boomed. Fairy Yellow Crane hadn't been sleeping very well to begin with. Now that she was struck by lightning, she jumped up in fright. She pushed open the window and looked at the pouring rain outside. The pitch-black curtain of the night seemed to have a hole in it, and the rain poured down from above. A familiar scream suddenly entered Huang He's ears, causing her entire body to tremble. The maid beside her pushed open the door, took a cloth from the shelf and wiped the rain off her body. "Miss, the night is cold. Why are you standing at the window in such a strong wind and rain?" Huang He hurriedly walked towards the door. "That scream seems to be senior sister Ling Fei's." "Yes, I heard news from Madame's court that Fairy Ling Fei's condition seems to have worsened." The maid hurriedly took an umbrella from the side and opened it, following Fairy Huang He out. Yun Shui, quickly bring a cloak for Mississippi. Miss, you're still going out so late." The maid called Yun Shui hurriedly ran over, holding a thick cloak in her hands. She helped the previous maid cover her with the cloak. Fairy Huang He did not speak, only tightly pursing her lips as she quickly walked out of the door. Yun Shui hurriedly took an umbrella and opened it as well. The three of them, master and servant, walked quickly through the pouring rain to Madame Feng's courtyard. Creak. When the door opened, Fairy Huang He did not care about the maid holding the umbrella for her and hurriedly walked in. However, there was no one in the court. Huang He stood in the empty courtyard in astonishment. He looked around in a circle. "Senior sister Ling Fei won't be unable to make it through tonight, right?" Huang He muttered to herself. Although Ling Fei had a bad temper after so many years together, she had long regarded her as a sister. Master is so ruthless. Miss, there's no one here, why don't we go back first? Yun Shui was a little timid. She pulled Huang He's hand and could not help but mutter softly. The other maid didn't say anything. She stood beside Huang He and tried her best to hold an umbrella for her, shielding her from the storm. However, the rain was too heavy. How could 2 wallpaper umbrellas block it? The master and servant trio had come all the way from their own court, and were already covered in rain. Let's go in and take a look. You guys stay here. Yunshu, wait for me at the door. I'll go in with Mississippi. Changfeng, miss, be careful. Fairy Yellow Crane took large strides and ran towards the corridor. She followed the 10-meter-long corridor and searched for Fairy Ling Fei from room to room. Changfeng's whole body was soaked by the rain. At this time her whole body was shivering, but she gritted her teeth and asked, Miss, there is something wrong here. Something was not right. Not even a servant girl who did rough work was in her master's courtyard. Where did everyone go at this time? The master and servant looked at each other and continued to walk to the backyard with full vigilance. After entering the most remote room in the backyard, Fairy Yellow Crane's footsteps paused slightly as her gaze focused on the bookshelf at the side. There seemed to be a passageway that the people who entered were careless and did not completely close. Therefore the gap was especially eye-catching at this moment. Fairy Yellow Crane's eyes were sharp and she instantly saw it. Mississippi, the maid held her arm nervously. Huang He took a deep breath and steeled her heart. Let's go. Huang He quickly walked into the passageway with Changfeng. Chapter 2095. This passageway was not long and there were only a few dozen flights of stairs down. Soon they reached the end. 2 fiendish stone lions appeared in front of them, one on the left and one on the right, squatting there like door gods. Fairy Yellow Crane could not help but feel puzzled. I wonder if the master knows about this secret passageway in master's backyard. Young miss, listen. Changfeng suddenly said. Fairy Yellow Crane naturally already heard it. It was senior sister Ling Fei's painful cry that came from the depths of the dark passageway. Young Mississippi, Changfeng suddenly grabbed Fairy Yellow Crane's hand, her whole body trembling. She did not know why, but she seemed to have a bad premonition in her heart. She kept feeling that this place was very dangerous, and it was best to leave as soon as possible. Stay here. Changfeng. Fairy Yellow Crane decisively threw down these words and hurriedly walked inside. At the end of this passageway were several small rooms with iron doors. When Fairy Yellow Crane walked over, one of the iron doors suddenly made a bang sound, and then a withered hand like dry wood was placed on the small window of the iron door. Yellow Crane inexplicably jumped in fright and abruptly turned her head. With just a glance she was so frightened that her whole body shrank back. Senior sister? She took a step forward and leaned against the small window of the iron door, staring straight at the person with disheveled hair inside, whose face was almost indistinguishable. Beautiful fairy? The maid who followed her young miss also stared with round eyes, looking at the person inside the iron door in disbelief. Yellow Crane only felt her heart beating violently. Suddenly she saw beautiful fairy inside the iron door rush forward. Her 2 pitch-black lips opened to an unimaginable width, revealing a mouthful of terrifying fangs. Yellow Crane's hand shrank back, causing the fangs to fall through the air. Changfeng hurriedly grabbed her young miss and pulled her back several steps. Young miss, what is this place? Why is beautiful fairy here? Yellow Crane was also very puzzled. Several months ago, beautiful senior sister was seriously injured in Julu City. When she was sent back to Shuntian Prefecture's main residence, her teeth were broken and her nose was crooked. At that time, Master glanced at beautiful senior sister and told them that he had contacted a divine doctor who would send beautiful senior sister out for treatment for a period of time. This was the so-called treatment? Master. Huang He clenched his fists tightly. He suddenly turned around and ran a few steps. Suddenly he stood still in a daze. Senior sister Ling Fei was tied to 2 iron pillars. At this time her face was already beyond recognition. Her bulging eyes were scarlet, and she was letting out a roar that was neither human nor beast. Madame Feng was standing at the side, looking coldly at her little disciple Huang He who had barged in. Master. Fairy Yellow Crane looked at the woman in front of her in a daze. Flowers are the same every year, but people are different every year. Huang He didn't know when her master had become someone she couldn't understand at all. Huang He, since you're here, come and take a look. Madame Feng nodded at her. Master, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm saving your senior sister. You turned senior sister Ling Fei into such a hideous state, and you said you were saving her? What do you know? Originally, your senior sister would not have been able to survive after being affected by the explosion. Now I'm just changing her a little and changing her way of living. You're doing this. Have you asked senior sister's opinion? Fairy Yellow Crane's whole body trembled. She clenched her fists tightly and asked angrily. Chapter 2096. Senior Sister Beauty, it was also you who made them like that. Master, what are you trying to do? Why did you make them look like half human, half ghost? Huang He, do you know why Beauty and Ling Fei ended up like this? Madame Feng stepped in front of her and looked straight at Fairy Yellow Crane, suddenly saying sternly, that's because they weren't strong enough. This is the way of the world. Weaklings don't think there's a place to reason. Only by continuously becoming strong, trampling everyone under your feet and standing at the peak. Only then can you look down on the earth and see everything as ants. Madame Feng stretched out her hands and raised them above her head, her sharp gaze locked onto Fairy Yellow Crane. Yellow Crane, you are only in your 20s, your life has just begun. You don't understand all of this, Master doesn't blame you. But how much have you seen of the darkness of this world? Not even 1 in 10,000. You stay by Master's side. Usually you like to fiddle with those useless flowers and plants and study your medical knowledge. Master doesn't care about you. But today you must stand on Master's side. Support everything that I do. Madame Feng's face was distorted as she approached Fairy Yellow Crane step by step. Only Master has succeeded. Only then can you continue to live your comfortable life. Continue to fiddle with your flowers and plants and don't need to look at anyone's face. Be your Shantian Prefecture's Fairy Yellow Crane, right? Looking at her master who was almost crazy, Fairy Yellow Crane trembled all over and lowered her head. Yellow Crane, do you know? Many years ago Master was also just an ordinary person. Master failed in opening her meridians and thought that this would be it in this lifetime. But now, do you see? Master possesses great power, and all of this was obtained through Master's continuous hard work and struggle. Is Master wrong? Is there anything wrong? Is it wrong for a person to want to become strong? Fairy Yellow Crane suddenly raised her head. Master. Senior Sister Beauty and Senior Sister Ling Fei, why did they turn into corpse puppets? They were clearly still alive, clearly not infected. It's you. It's you who turned them into corpse puppets as test subjects. That's because they were stupid. Madame Feng's expression was agitated and she suddenly took out a transparent medicine bottle from her sleeve. Do you see this? This kind of medicinal liquid could make an ordinary person strong. Huang He, do you want to improve your cultivation further? Believe me, I won't harm you. Your 2 senior sisters are stupid and can't be put to good use. If that wasn't the case, how could they have evolved into corpse puppets? Instead of becoming a superhuman? Huang He, I believe that you will never become like Ling Fei and Beauty. Don't come over. Fairy Yellow Crane's body trembled as she retreated step by step. Chang Feng even trembled as she held her young miss's hand tightly, supporting her young miss as they retreated step by step. Had the manor mistress gone mad? Why did she become so scary? Chang Feng's eyelashes trembled as she dragged her young miss back step by step. Huang He. This bottle was a heaven-defying and fate-changing medicinal liquid. How many people could only dream of obtaining it? Why are you staring at your master with such a fearful expression? Believe me, as long as you swallow this medicinal liquid, you will immediately obtain a unique ability. Even if your cultivation is lacking, you will at least have an ability to defend yourself in the future. Young miss. Chang Feng suddenly pushed Fairy Yellow Crane back. Go. Chapter 2097. Right now Madame Feng looked too abnormal. If Miss continued to stay here, nothing good would come out of it. Even if Chang Feng risked her life, she could not let Miss die here. Fairy Huang, he was a famous alchemist in Shantian Prefecture. In terms of cultivation, she was naturally not as outstanding as Ling Fei and Beautiful Fairy. With Chong Feng's forceful push, she stumbled forward a few steps. Turning her head, she saw Chong Feng pounce forward and hug Madame Feng. Turning her head, she saw Madame Feng standing still with tears in her eyes. She anxiously shouted, "Miss, run. Quickly run. Let go." Madame Feng was currently in a demonic state. Her hand formed a fist and fiercely smashed towards Chong Feng's back. With the first punch, Chong Feng spat out a mouthful of blood. There was blood at the corner of her mouth, but she still screamed anxiously at Huang He. With the second punch, Chong Feng spat out shattered internal organs. 2 streaks of black blood seeped out of the corners of her mouth. Her voice also sounded like she was on the verge of death. Huang He did not dare to stay any longer. With tears in her eyes, she turned and quickly ran out of the secret passage. From behind her came Madame Feng's deranged third punch, accompanied by the sound of Chong Feng spitting out blood. Fairy Huang He's heart ached. Tightly clenching her fist, she quickly ran out of the secret passage. Scram! Madame Feng saw that she had actually run away. A trace of hostility flitted across her face, and she fiercely kicked Chong Feng's body. He originally thought that with this kick Chong Feng would definitely be sent flying. Unexpectedly, Chong Feng tightly hugged her leg and desperately refused to let go. Madame Feng flew into a rage out of humiliation. She could only pull out a long sword and cut off Chong Feng's 2 arms. Then she quickly chased upwards. Outside, the pouring rain did not stop at all. Huang He tightly grabbed Yun Shui, who was lingering at the gate of the courtyard, and madly ran out with her. "What happened, miss? Where's Chong Feng? Where did Chong Feng go? Go!" Huang He did not have time to explain in detail. She dragged Yun Shui out of Shuntian Prefecture. The rain on the streets converged. As the 2 fled, they stepped on the puddles on the ground, making splashing sounds. "Huang He, Master has treated you well all these years. You actually dared to betray Master." Madame Feng's cold voice faintly came from behind them. Suddenly, a swift and fierce palm energy, carrying a terrifying spiritual pressure, attacked Huang He directly in front of him. "Young miss!" Yun Shui screamed and suddenly pounced in front of Fairy Huang He. "Yun Shui!" Yun Shui's battered body was swept away by her master like a withered quail and fell heavily to the ground. Fairy Yellow Crane hurriedly scrambled over. With trembling hands, she fished out Yun Shui, who was bleeding from the corner of her mouth from the mud on the ground. Yun Shui, you asked for it." Madame Feng's eyes flashed. Let's go, miss. Yun Shui used all her strength to pull on Fairy Huang He's sleeve. Huang He shook his head and sobbed while holding Yun Shui's head. "Miss, let's go. All these years, I'm indebted to young mistress for not forsaking me and treating me like a sister. Yun Shui, if there's an afterlife, I'll definitely chase after young mistress." Yun Shui. Fairy Yellow Crane crawled out of the muddy water and leaped up. Carrying Yun Shui, she flew to the roof and fled forward in a panic. Reckless fool. Madame Feng's eyes turned cold. She raised her hand and was about to lead a large group of Palace of Cold Blood disciples to chase after them when she suddenly heard a sharp whistle. Madame Feng frowned slightly and stopped. She looked back at the pitch-black night sky. Chapter 2098. The whistle sounded several times, a total of 8 times. Madame Feng knew that they could not stay any longer. She hurriedly led the disciples of the Palace of Cold Blood away. Boom. Outside the window, a flash of lightning woke Arbor up. He slowly opened his eyes in the dark night. He turned his head to look. Outside the window, heavy rain poured down, accompanied by the sound of thunder and lightning. The bright light illuminated the night until it was white. The little guy turned his face and lay on top of the quietly sleeping Prince Imo. He pursed his lips and stared at him for a long time. How could there be such a handsome man in the world? How did she have the fortune to meet such a person in this life? If she had missed him when she was 7. Arbor's heart shrank. He did not dare to imagine such a life. He felt that if he lost this person he would lose his destination and hope. Miss Chiao reached out a small hand and gently traced his exquisite brows. She touched his cheeks and his hair, and her small hand finally stopped on his thin lips that were tightly pursed into a straight line. Sigh. A faint sigh came from his mouth. His phoenix eyes, which were originally closed, slowly opened under the dim light of the night. Miss Chiao shrunk her hand guiltily and fell on his chest. She then reached out two small hands and pulled up the blanket to cover her head, pretending that she had already fallen asleep. Wife, you've been touching me for almost an hour. You've even woken me up. Do you want to go to Mount Wu with your husband? Miss Chiao, who was guilty, felt that from her ears to her small face, there was not a single spot that was not burning. It was her fault. It was her fault for not sleeping in the middle of the night and touching him blindly. Arbor's eyes were round and bright. He suddenly poked his head out of the blanket and muttered in a small voice, You. If you can't endure it, then you don't have to endure it anymore. Emolien was startled. His lips involuntarily pulled into a faint smile. Being touched by this little guy, his heart was in a mess. How could he fall asleep? He simply sat up with her in his arms. With a wave of his hand, a faint flame lit the two dim yellow candles in the room. Why are you lighting the lamp? Miss Chiao really wanted to give herself a slap. Why was she stuttering? The man lowered his head and glanced at her. His gaze was mischievous as he laughed in a deep voice. Of course, it's to take a good look at my wife. No, don't look. Arbor felt that his face was probably boiling. It was so hot that it could probably cook an egg. Arbor reached out to block his eyes and glanced into the room. Extinguish. Turn off the lights. That won't do. How can I look at my wife when the lights are off? Emolien laughed in a muffled voice. He reached out and took her little hand down. He pressed it against his thin lips and kissed it gently. Chow, do you know how much I like you? His slender fingers caressed her small face inch by inch as his phoenix eyes stared straight at her with a smile. I'm willing to give you the most precious and beautiful things in the world. I want you to be the happiest woman in the world. My Jojo deserves the best. My Jojo deserves to be treated with all my heart and give everything. My Jojo. My Jojo. You're good like this. So good that he couldn't bear to see her suffer even the slightest bit. He didn't want her to casually follow him in this small and shabby place. Why are you so good to me? Arbor's eyes welled up with tears. Chapter 2099. Why are you so good to me? Miss Chiao murmured. If you keep spoiling me like this, what am I supposed to do when I ascend to the heavens? Arbor reached out to touch his face. Emolien could not help but laugh. Silly girl, of course it's because you're my Jojo. He was willing to protect his little wife like a precious jade or a pearl. If his wifey wanted to ascend to the heavens, there was nothing he could do. At most, he would ascend to the heavens with her. Arbor arched in his arms. Looking at him under the light, she felt that he was abnormally hazy and extraordinarily handsome, like an exquisite jade carving in front of her. He was truly carved and polished, a beauty like jade. The little fellow's claws very naturally stroked his well-defined waist and abdomen under his clothes. Emolien. What, haven't you touched enough? The man helplessly reached out to press down on her restless claws. Arbor moved in his chest, looked up at him and said softly, Husband. Emolien's heart was about to melt when she called him husband. His little one was really too torturous. Prince Emo could not help but want to sigh. At this moment the storm was raging outside, but the room was filled with intimacy. The sound of Fairy Yellow Crane banging on the inn's door resounded through the entire street in the silent night. Open the door. Yellow Crane threw herself against the door. It was unknown whether her face was covered in tears or rain, but it was mixed with mud and water. There was no way to see her exquisite makeup of the past. Who is it disturbing my sleep in the middle of the night? It's long past check-in time, okay? The waiter ran out while cursing. The moment he opened the door, he saw a woman covered in filth, with water dripping from her head to her hair. She was carrying a corpse whose face could not be seen clearly as she barged in. The waiter was dumbfounded as he scolded, Damn W, what are you doing? Benefactor, little benefactor. Little benefactor. Fairy Yellow Crane's eyes were unfocused as she cried out. You crazy woman. The person you're looking for isn't here. Get out. The waiter's face darkened as he looked at the wet floor of the lobby. Where did this lunatic come from? Knocking on the door in the middle of the night? Not only did he disturb people's sleep, he even brought a corpse to the inn. Bad luck, bad luck, bad luck. How unlucky. If you don't leave, I'll get someone to kick you out. The waiter said angrily. Benefactor, benefactor. In the room upstairs, Arbor suddenly moved. It sounds like Huang He's voice. Emolien's arm that was circling around her waist tightened slightly before loosening by an inch or so. It was such a good time, yet there were always people coming to disturb them. Prince Emo felt helpless. It was already the middle of the night and he couldn't even fall asleep while hugging his wife. Let's go down and take a look. Huang He's voice sounded a little off. In her impression, this fairy yellow crane had always been rather amusing. But today, this hoarse roar had a thick nasal tone. Could it be that something had happened? Emolien got up first and picked up a lotus leaf-colored outer robe for the little fellow to wear. After tying a light yellow belt, he hugged this soft little fellow and kissed her. Then he said, "Let's go." He reached out and took the black robe hanging on the clothes rack and casually put it on himself. The two walked out of the room hand in hand. Yellow Crane's ruckus in the middle of the night was so loud that all the residents on the second floor of the inn got up and opened their doors to take a look. Chapter 2100. Dao Wuji quickly walked to the two of them and scratched his head. "What's going on?" "We'll go down and take a look." "You guys rest first," Arbor said indifferently. "Forget it. You've already woken up. Let's go down together." Fairy Ginkgo giggled and took 2 steps forward, wanting to hold Arbor's arm. Emolien glared at her but she didn't care. Since she wasn't going to hold her arm, she giggled and snuggled up to Arbor. "Little sister Chow, big sister has always wanted to ask you. How can your skin be so good? It looks so fresh, like it's coated with a layer of jade. It's so bouncy." Fairy Ginkgo stretched out a finger and gently poked darling Chow's cheek. Emolien glared at her with a murderous look. "Put down your paw." Ji Chen was speechless. Dao Wuji couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Off to the side, little Tai Sui rolled its eyes at the heavens. "Big sister? You're so much older than her. Where did the word big sister come from?" Right. Dao Wuji hurriedly nodded. "Ginkgo, you don't even know this. Sis-in-law's skin is so good, it must be because she's young. Like you're already 100-year-old. No matter what, your skin can't be as smooth as a teenage girl's, like a peeled egg." Fairy Ginkgo aimed a punch at Dao Wuji's face. Although little Tai Sui snorted disdainfully at her, at least it had a brain and didn't mock her age. Did this Dao Wuji not want to live anymore? He actually dared to mock big sister as a 100-year-old. Old. This was simply intolerable. Arbor expressionlessly glanced at them and suddenly took out a box of ointment from her inner world. Exclusive beauty ointment. It removes wrinkles and preservatives and maintains smooth and bouncy skin. Apply half a spoonful every morning and night. See results in half a month. After saying that, she threw the beauty cream to the Ginkgo fairy and walked forward with a da-da-da sound. Everyone, Pft. Fairy Peony couldn't help but laugh. "Ginkgo, you have good eyesight." She was simply too adorable. Not to mention the cold air around her, her actions from time to time always made people feel warm and cute. They really didn't know how to feel about it. Tap tap tap. Arbor took the lead and walked down the stairs. His gaze fell on the crazy fairy yellow crane in the hall. "What's going on?" Fairy Yellow Crane's battered and exhausted appearance startled her. She immediately quickened her pace and walked down the wooden stairs. The waiter had already called for a few helpers and was pushing Fairy Yellow Crane to chase her out of the inn. Upon seeing this, Xiao Mu hastily berated, "What are you doing? Stop." The waiter and the others turned around. Seeing that it was the customers who stopped them, he hurriedly bowed to Arbor and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, are we disturbing your rest? Let's kick this crazy woman out right now." "No need." Arbor casually tossed a small bag of spirit coins to the waiter. "You don't need to care about this matter. Come back at dawn to clean up this place." The waiter lightly weighed it and knew that there were at least 20 spirit coins in this bag. Not to mention 1 corpse, even 10 corpses wouldn't be a problem. Seeing that this stoic-faced little girl was so generous, the waiter hurriedly beamed and nodded. Yes. Then we'll leave first. Go. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.